listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news and more from across these disunited states and the surface of our increasingly divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Hello and good morning, good people. Hope everybody's doing well. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were about 15,048 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about 373 new deaths. Over the past week, there has been an average of about 14,031 cases per day. That's a decrease of 42% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 42% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 52% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,398,000 people across the U.S., 98,000 people total. In France, for the first time since last year, cafes and restaurants are now once again allowed to serve customers indoors. I am sure many folks are going to be enjoying that, especially as we know from conversations with guests, the French seem to be quite a bit more skeptically minded about COVID-19 and the lockdown measures, implemented to combat it. So for them, I'm sure a lot of them are going to be relieved to be able to get back out and eat. In national news, back here in the States, the Senate yesterday passed the Endless Frontier Act. That's an industrial policy bill cast sort of in terms in the competition with China and trying to promote more high-tech industrial development, R&D, manufacturing, also expanding research and development into these things. Anyway, the White House also announced a plan yesterday to use the Defense Production Act to mass produce medical goods that are in short supply in the United States. This announcement follows a 100-day review of the country's supply chain undertaken following the passage of an executive order signed this February that tasked the admin with inspecting 4 areas of the American economy: pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, large capacity batteries, and rare and critical minerals. These two pushes, one from the White House, one from Congress, kind of go hand in hand, just pointing that out. Over in Washington State, they're incentivizing vaccines with marijuana. Their program, and no, this is not fake news, Joints for Jabs, gives out a free joint to anyone who gets the vaccine. The state already has already hit 70% total vaccinated folks and are pushing for 100%. In international news, Beijing hit back at the Senate's passage of the earlier mentioned Endless Frontier Act. Again, that's an industrial plan that was just passed by the Senate. It's often cast as a way to accelerate American innovation in its competition with China. And from China's perspective, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National People's Congress of the country there said that of the language in the bill, it is, quote, full of Cold War thinking and ideological prejudice, end quote. In Afghanistan, at least 10 people involved in mining clearance operations in an Afghan province have been shot dead. Local officials there blame the Taliban. The Taliban, however, has denied involvement. In Moscow, judges meeting today could label Alexei Navalny's organizations as extremist. And this is following a move earlier on by a financial review body, which ruled on Alexei Navalny's organizations. Alexei Navalny, widely known as a sort of government opposition dude, probably more widely, puffed up or more widely cast as this big opposition figure in the Western media. He seems to be a slightly more marginal figure in the States. Anyway, the narrative around him, of course, for those who haven't been paying attention, Alexei Navalny said to have been poisoned by the Kremlin, by Putin, sort of exfiltrated from Russia to Germany, where he was then held comatose in a hospital for months, later revived, and apparently recovered, now serving a prison sentence. And in the sort of weird latest, one of the latest bits of the Navalny saga, Jamarl, remember when Navalny was sick in prison?
Right.
And basically the Russian government refused to permit him to have his personal doctor come in. And so he launched his own hunger strike while he was in jail, making himself even sicker, apparently. His potassium levels specifically were the thing that people were talking about. His potassium levels had gotten so low because he'd stopped eating that he is a spiral. He could have died if he kept that up. And eventually he started eating again, and the situation sort of resolved itself. But you remember the media's coverage of that?
Oh, they were acting like they were killing them in the jail. It was like, the Russian government is killing them all
Russia
day.
was killing him.
It's like, how come nobody brings up Navalny? Why nobody brings up? And it's like, yeah, I remember that. They went full bore into that narrative of things as if the Russian government was killing him as opposed to him just hunger strike.
Having said that, if judges today rule that his organizations are extremist, that might be a bit heavy-handed, even though many of them, if not most of them, probably do have backing from outside the country. And I get there's a sort of technical definition thing there, but still, man.
Let's come back to this one.
We can come back to this one. One last headline in international news. Well, kind of two, but we'll see about that. Suspected Israeli airstrikes on the city of Damascus in Syria are said to have caused the deaths of about 5 government soldiers and 3 allied soldiers. That's according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is, by the way, a one-man outfit based in the UK that says it uses a few hundred anonymous sources in Syria, has no oversight from outside parties, but has nevertheless a catchy name. They are the source again for this. Eight people said to have been killed by those Israeli airstrikes. In tech news, El Salvador has adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, making it the first country in the world to make the cryptocurrency an official currency, which visitors can use to make purchases from businesses and which residents can use even to pay their taxes. The International Monetary Fund, meanwhile, has discussed this move critically, wondering publicly how this move would affect the body's lending to El Salvador. With that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Naturally, the IMF would be kind of publicly questioning its loaning abilities to a country that decides to go crypto. Mm-hmm. But here's the other thing. I mean, remember when we've had Steve Grumbine on all the time. We've had him on maybe 2 or 3 times now to talk about cryptocurrencies. And he's not critical of them. He's critical of the idea that they are currencies. Right. You know, he believes that they're investment vehicles, all that. But now that a country has decided to accept it as legal tender and allow people to pay taxes in it, what does that do to the take that it's not a currency? Jamarl, what do you think? I mean, what is a currency other than what that country uses for its currency? It's currency. What it decides to accept as currency. Right. That's kind of my point, right? It's like none of it's real. So it's always weird to have these conversations about like what is a currency or not. It's a currency when it starts used as a currency. I mean, the moment that because look, there's nothing. Okay, there are things, but there's nothing real stopping a country from saying, from here on out, this is our country, this is our currency. This is what we use as our legal tender in this country. Mic drop. And they walk out the room. They could do that. I mean, a country could do whatever they want on some level. The fight or the back and forth over the currency versus the vehicle, I think part of that is a push for legitimacy of the cryptocurrency thing. Meaning, like, it's this notion of being accepted as something, as opposed to, like, this is a weird thing. This may be a weird analogy, but the difference between an android versus a human being. And you have the android who has this weird insecurity about never quite being real because his entire world and context is based around humanity. So think of Data, for example. You have Data who has this, like, a course in humanities, right? Where he wants to learn how to be a person. And he has all of these capabilities that are easier, better than human beings. And human beings are like, dude, you don't know what you got. He's like, I just want to be a person. There's this insecurity. He wouldn't recognize it as an insecurity. He would recognize it as, I'm trying to learn about blah, 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 blah. Whatever. It functions as an insecurity. Well, same thing with the crypto on some level. You have an investment vehicle, and you have a lot of people who are investing in an investment vehicle, and you have people who bring up things like dollars, and it's like, yeah, guys, but you'd never be a dollar, or you'd never be this. And they're like, what do you mean would never be that? I think it's a certain level of insecurity associated with it as a vehicle. I could be wrong. But maybe are you talking about the people? Are you talking about the people who represent or espouse cryptocurrencies? Yeah, who are like full board into it, who are pushing it hard. Isn't it always the? I'll put it like this: if the outside forces, if the people who use the dollars, or if the IMF to come back to the specific organization, if they're the person that they're the group that's like, you get your currency isn't real. We have the real currency. We use the real currency over here. That currency is fake. That currency is made up. Aren't they kind of the bully? And isn't it the bully that is insecure about the potential value of the cryptocurrency. It's like the sort of bigger kid in school, and I grew up being a bigger kid in school, although I'd like to think I wasn't a bully.
Yeah.
But the bigger kid in school who might be a little bit insecure about what some of the other kids are going to, what they're capable of, how smart they are, whatever, how competent or confident they are.
Yeah.
And so that kid gets insecure. They decide to use the advantage they have, which is sheer strength, to bully the other kid. Isn't that kind of what the IMF does? And then the cryptocurrency folks, some of them might be insecure, but others of them might just be dissident and confident and not insecure.
I think the thing is, there's this kind of push for relevance and value under normal circumstances in human engagement and interaction. It's not enough that I like it. I also need other people to like it in order to give it a certain value to it. Meaning me in and of itself is not enough. I don't think this is shocking in regards to crypto or anything else. I think this is just the way people act. Religions trying to get more people involved. You have it's like, hey, I play chess. You want to come join me? Like all of these things where it's like you're trying to bring people in to increase your numbers. It's almost like legitimacy is conferred by numbers. I think this is the same thing with us. You have a new budding industry. In that budding industry, you want people to respect it and to think about it and to regard it. You want more people involved in it because, again, it gives it a certain degree of heft. And then you have these things that are dollars. And the dollar looks and says, you'd never be.
But both sides are groupthink. That's the thing. I mean, whatever, the air that you see inflating the perceived value of the cryptocurrency is what's, filling up cash proper right now. In other words, money as we're used to it, specifically fiat money, the whole point of the current monetary system is people constantly wondering about its value.
Right.
Our dollar is inherently insecure. And we talk about this all the time. And the inherent insecurity of the dollar, I would assume, contributes to the perceived sort of emotional insecurity that people who are so deeply invested in the dollar, all the people who have the most dollars, if the values of their dollars are suddenly gone. That's my point. And so like international capital, just all the organizations and entities around the world who have the most money proper, not the largest stakes in companies or the largest possessions of real estate, for instance, which are real assets, but who have the most money sitting in the stock market or whatever, invested, all the hedge funds, etc.
The guys that jump off the building on Black Friday.
Yeah, and
because everything goes away. Yeah,
and the same people who like to walk through the rotating door and occasionally work at the IMF and occasionally work in the White House, or occasionally the head of the Treasury Department, etc.
Yeah,
that same crew of people, aren't they inherently deeply? That's my point. Aren't they so insecure about this stuff that if anybody brings up cryptocurrency, at first they make fun of it, then they grudgingly have to accept it, then they have to express a bit of their fear about it, and they're like, no, really keep it. If you do that, we're not going to lend to you, etc. Isn't that just a couple of years now? I don't know.
I don't know how. I mean, look, I would say that there may be concerns if they thought it was an actual challenge. I think it's only that, right? It's like if I think I'm impervious, what's the issue? Hillary Clinton got along perfectly fine with Bernie Sanders when she thought, I'm going to cakewalk this race, and this guy's just my full opposition, and everything is great. And then when it became a real race, it changed. So I feel you on this. I mean, there is an insecurity associated with it because if it goes away, you lose your value, you lose something out of that. And so, but look, I don't know the internal dynamics and the conversations that's taking place between crypto versus the other one. I do know that I agree with Grumbine, but I always agree with Grumbine grudgingly on stuff like this. Because it's like, yes, Grumbine, it's a investment device, but only because no country has taken it as a currency. But meaning it can change overnight if a country decides to do it. It's just conceptual. It's not like, all right, there's a phone that's there on the ground, a physical matter around that I can pick up and wave with my hand. It's not that. And so, it leaves all sorts of options in regards to what countries can do and the conceptions they can have in manipulating and using it.
Yes, there's a specific case, too, that Grumbine could make, or that, anybody could make. I could make it, which is cryptocurrencies, okay, useful, kind of, but they're not that useful for countries. Mm-hmm. What countries want is not a cryptocurrency. Any given country doesn't want to have, they don't want to go all Austrian or whatever. They don't want to just have a constant supply of money that they're having to use, and their role specifically is to tax. Governments want to control the purse strings in terms of interest rates, being able to print money, and the levels of taxation, et cetera. All the things that MMT likes to talk about, the things the government can do with money. Yeah. They would lose the ability to do a lot of that stuff if the government suddenly were a cryptocurrency.
Right.
Specifically a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Where,
maybe that's the argument against it.
yeah, the scarcity on Bitcoin is so set into the foundations of what it is. The mining process.
It basically can't be a currency
You
unless
can't-
you want to
yeah.
hobble yourself viciously. So
Exactly, from a
Yeah.
country's perspective.
yeah,
Now-
because the country needs the ability to be flexible in regards to expenditures.
Yes.
And even though they may create this kind of economic system to put it's a feint or this kind of attachment, tenuous one to physical materiality in regards to, okay, we have resources, we can't go beyond our resources, so we're going to have this economic system to make us stuff
But
work
what
like that.
about when you start combining the cryptocurrency, the parts of the cryptocurrency that we're used to, which is, it's intensely speculative. The value of it varies on a day-to-day basis. Massive boom cycles, booms, and then eventually busts every time. We've seen it, even though it keeps going up, the value keeps going up. What if you combine that with the blockchain element, specifically the distributed autonomous organizations that people like to talk about with Ethereum, where you'll have open floating contracts, you'll have communities of people who each have a sort of stake in the community, in what it's doing.
Yeah.
They're trying to solve problems. If you want a problem solved, you put a contract up and you can pay people in the cryptocurrency that you're doing this all in. It's sort of like this weird,
Interesting.
self-motivating, self-producing beast of a thing where the communities of people can sort of incentivize each other to work on
Yeah.
it. Couldn't you have something approaching, maybe not a country, but like a local government or something like that use the cryptocurrency as its currency?
I
at
think you
least
could do
one
it
of them.
if they were a balanced budget and they didn't have to, meaning like states have to be balanced budgets, right? Local governments on some level have to balance their budgets.
Yeah.
If you had something like that where it's like you didn't have this flexibility in your spending and that didn't matter, then fair game. But the catch is the country needs to have a certain level of dexterity. And if you are locked, like what happens when your country, I don't know, there's COVID.
I would, well,
Does
think about this for a second.
does it care about COVID?
What if
like
what if it creates a bunch of jobs that it will pay out in cryptocurrency,
Mhm.
and it will pay out in itself, basically? But it creates a bunch of jobs, a bunch of things for people to do. The community as a whole decides to pitch in to create in different batches tasks for people to do. This is what we need. We need a bunch of PPE.
Yeah.
We need people to start up and produce a bunch of PPE, those kinds of things. You can pay people to do these sorts of things. But maybe this gets at, I don't even
who's
know.
paying
man.
it?
Either people who have decided to pitch in or a government, quote unquote,
Yeah.
that is either through taxation or through some other, you can think of a combination of processes, either taxation or voluntary contributions, effectively lobbying, who want specific tasks done. They put extra money into it.
Right.
It gets murky, but you get my point.
Yeah.
It's this sort of new way of solving problems potentially. And I'm curious, I hear people talking about it, and I don't see any, it's early enough that you wouldn't see governments implementing these kinds of things, but I'm curious if one were to,
Yeah.
how that would work.
I do know in the software community we have stuff like that where people it's like, let's say like GitHub, and it's like, all right, we're going to build this process. We have all of these people adding on to it. And
Exactly.
it's this kind of collaborative engagement with basically strangers, people you don't necessarily know. You're just working on it.
That's how free and open source of that whole community works. That's how, Linux, people, of course, who
Yeah.
are familiar with that, the foundations of modern software, practically all of it is built by people who become less anonymous to each other as they work with each other. But people who start out as just anonymous people on the internet,
Yes. I mean, and look, that's one of the best elements of the tech stuff. I mean, this notion of you build a product and that product can be distributed to 1 billion people. Easy. Nobody's losing anything in the process.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, they're going to need the ability to run it and everything else, but basically you're not losing anything in the creation of a process and distributing that process out to anybody else. And software, that's how it works. I mean, a lot of the stuff that you get in software when you're doing that stuff is free. They just give it away. They get their jollies off of the fact that they can do it, meaning their value in this is not, here's $1. Yes, $1 helps. But oftentimes the value in it is, all right, I've just built a system that somebody else can use in their products. And now I can do the same thing in products that I get.
Well,
it's an understood way of operating in that industry.
if you become and here's the other side of it, and this applies not just in software, but applies to humanity simply. The people who are the most prominent members of the the dev communities for those languages, if they're known for being a prominent member of the developing a language, whatever, they're more likely to get good jobs. They're more likely to get a bunch of good offers, be able to work on more interesting projects. The whole prestige element, or the idea that you will get credit socially for having done something good, I feel like we could tap into that a bit more. That's what, if you look
Of course
back,
we can tap into that a bit more.
I feel-
If you get rid of people's needs, yes.
yeah, well, yes.
The issue is need. The issue is if I need
yes.
food,
Yeah.
then I'm not building you free anything.
Now, what do you think about the robber baron thing, where the robber barons at a certain point went philanthropist, and so you'd have Andrew Carnegie or whatever
Yeah.
expiating their moral guilt all the money they'd made by setting up libraries and foundations and institutions that last centuries.
How
What do you think
old-
about that idea?
How old was he when he decided to do that?
I would need to look into
You're
it.
getting to the end of your life.
Exactly.
You're like, I don't know what happens after.
That's the
I can't
thought
take it with
process.
me.
Yep.
Maybe I should give it back. I mean, no. You spend your entire life accumulating that wealth and that money when people could have been using that stuff. Look, I don't have an issue with these guys appropriating or getting wealth. That's not my issue with this. My issue is people who don't have it. And so I don't have, or the influence that gives in regards to our society and everything else. The problem is that they typically just put that money into things that they care about. It's like, oh, I'm a Mormon, so I'm going to put this into a church.
Well,
It's like
you
that
say
type of
the
stuff.
problem. It's funny. The problem is they put it into things they care about, and I guess the problem then is that most people just care about a couple specific things, and usually they're self-serving.
Right.
But putting things. I guess about here's the thing. As a human being, say you're an ambitious person, you want to make a difference in the world. Maybe you even want to make the world better. How do you do that? Right now, there are like two big tracks. One is you try to make a ton of money, and then you use that money as your little lever or whatever to make things happen. Two, you get involved in public service in some way, quote unquote, which really means going to work for one government or another or some nonprofit, or somewhere in between these two worlds, somewhere in between governance and corporations. Look at the American government. Yeah. Just if you were to be honest with me, do you think that I personally would make more of a difference? Say I could make a bunch of money, more of a difference if I were to go and become a politician or become involved in the political system in some way, or if I were to try to make money and donate that money as soon as I made it even to good causes.
Like if Jeff Bezos gave away his wealth immediately when he got it. Like he says, I'm not taking any revenue and I'm putting this money into these sources.
Yeah, because with
else.
the money thing, you can just think of tens or hundreds of thousands of people could do that and make a difference with their lives. Whereas politics just seems stagnant. It just seems like you're contributing to a bureaucratic system. And so I wish there were a third way. I'm not even particularly like money grubbing. I don't want to make a bunch of money.
Yeah.
That's not my
You're just
thing.
trying to say if you could give influence.
I'm saying,
which one has more?
For an ambitious person.
I
Exactly.
don't know. I want to say the politician. I mean, regardless of whatever that. I mean, we had this conversation once before where we were talking about Bruce Wayne, and he was like, dude, I think you overestimate the capabilities of billionaires. I think it's that. But no, I think government has all sorts of capability. But the catch is, it's hamstrung. It's like you have all these guys with their specific interests. And the catch is, okay, well, corruption, bureaucracy, all of those things had to play into it. But when it gets his mind right, oh my God. Like, that's the catch, right? It's kind of like gravity. It's like, oh, God, it's very weak until it gets to the point where it gets infinite. Yeah. I think government is a similar way. You have people who are doing their own thing. You get into these periods where people are just not entirely paying attention. So these people are just kind of on different pages and everybody's talking their own thing. And you get intransigence. You get stuff not necessarily working, and that stuff just kind of goes on for a period of time. And then something happens. 600,000 people drop dead. You have a bunch of Democrats in Capitol. You have politicians who typically are untouched, get touched, terrified that Trump supporters are going to eat them alive when they're raiding the Capitol. You have 1 year of protests where a police station gets set on fire. I've never seen anything like that in America. And so then you get this kind of thing of these guys are like, okay, something's changing. Can't respond to it. They don't know how to respond to it, but they get it. No, I think when government gets his head right and it gets into this thing where the public is backing it and there's somebody who is there that can respond to the public, like you said, good leadership. Yeah, I think it's extraordinary. I mean, think of the projects, for example. If you needed to build, I don't know, a nuclear bomb, for that, how many billionaires are going to come together to build a nuclear bomb? Do they have the resources? Do they have the inclination? Do they even have the capability of being in that process without getting something out of it? Meaning, yes, the government in the abstract of America gets something out of it because they want to fight the war and everything else. But the individual actors that are involved in it, they don't get anything out of that bomb. Maybe the contracts or whatever else. But I guess the point I'm making here is there's an aspect of government that is disassociated with this notion of self-interest in the specific economic sense. And I have to cut this right because it sounds, each of these parts are nuanced. But in doing that, I don't think you could do that with just private billionaires. I mean, I think I agree with the argument about the Bruce Wayne stuff. It's like, yeah, I think it's overestimating the capabilities that Bruce Wayne has.
I agree. To be clear,
as a billionaire, yeah,
I agree. To be clear, I'm not like a person who would describe themselves favorably as like, oh, I'm a capitalist. That's not like one of the top 5 labels or whatever I'm going to go by. And it's not labels. What do you say?
Those labels are too imprecise.
Well, labels can be too imprecise, but if I found a good label, I'd be happy to stick it on my lapel, whatever. But it's just, there are definite problems with the individual people getting too powerful. Anyway, we're cutting up against our break. Let's go into it so we can come back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute in our soapbox segment with Jamarl's monologue and a short back and forth. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault lines.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. This is our typical soapbox segment, but him and I were talking back and forth on his notion of politics and our governance, so I'm not going to keep this one long. And to be honest, it doesn't really need to be long. Negotiations fall apart. New bipartisan negotiations that were supposed to be taking place with Joe Biden and Republicans have fallen apart on infrastructure. Now what? Now, where does a person go? How is Joe Biden going to get this accomplished if he can't even get the negotiations done in this kind of intimate atmosphere? And not just that, if you can't even get the negotiations done with your own party. So this is right here. This came out downstairs, walking D.C., front page, infrastructure talks collapse. So this is New York Times. President Biden in the negotiations with a group of Republicans led by Shelley Moore Capito, over the infrastructure package Tuesday as the two sides failed to strike a deal after weeks of talks. As key part of Biden's domestic agenda now enters a new, uncharted phase as the president shifts his focus to a separate group of Democrats and Republicans in hopes of reaching a deal. But the failure to reach a deal with Capito, something liberals had warned as inevitable, could increase pressure on Biden to ultimately forge ahead with only Democrats, as he did during the past stimulus talks earlier this year. Yes. Now, Biden was very cordial about this, and he made the point of saying, hey, I thank you for negotiating in good faith. But of course, he's going to say that, right? He's going to try to be above it all and magnanimous. So great. Of course, Capito was no such thing, and she basically blamed Biden. She pinned it on Biden, saying she was disappointed by his decision to end the talks after refusing her latest offer on a revised package. This back and forth would have basically stretched on until the midterms, where Republicans would have been perfectly happy to say Biden got nothing done. He didn't want to negotiate. We tried to negotiate in good faith, and he didn't want to do it, Biden and the Democrats. At which point, they either take the House and the Senate, and they go about the work of whittling away Biden's presidency from him. If you think back, look at Obama. Is that not what took place with Obama, or for that matter, Bill Clinton, or for that matter, Donald Trump? You lose one house, you lose the next, you lose the presidency, and your party is out of power. This seems to be something that we keep repeating. It's as if the public is sloshing back and forth, running to one to get away from the other, only to realize that the one they're running from is also one of the goblins. It's a very strange process. And yeah, so right now, Biden's package is basically dead in the water. But again, I said this package was dead in the water a long time ago. So Shane, bipartisanship. Question. If the deal, or if the organization that Democrats and Republicans set up to study the January 6th insurrection, where the people basically ran on the Capitol, if that was set up and structured to be bipartisan, which it was, I think it was like split almost in half, and it was even like veto from either side, all of them had to agree on it, like it was a structured organization that was going to be bipartisan, and Republicans still say, no, then is this not a waste of time? Meaning, why are you, if you literally work out a bipartisan group to the degree that a group can be bipartisan, when you get equal amount of ability to say, yeah, I don't want that guy to even testify or whatever else, and they still say no, like they negotiate that with you, and then they turn around and say, yeah, we changed our mind. No. Then how are you going to get anything accomplished on an infrastructure bill where they fundamentally disagree with the premise of the bill. Like, they may say boats and bridges and everything else, but then they're going to say, okay, well, we want to pay for it in this kind of weird way. It's like, what? It's always going to be something that is going to create some kind of conflict. And look, I get the Biden, is the bipartisan thing, but is this one of those moments where America requires him to, just get the job done that he told America he was going to do as he got voted in? You're more bipartisan in this frame of mind than I am on.
I don't know. I mean, maybe, but or maybe not. It kind of reminds me of like a married couple who hates each other and they're forced to live with each other, I guess, because they're married and they're screwed up in the head. Like so many people are, including myself, of course. And
You married?
No, screwed up in the head. I mean,
Okay, my bad.
no. And they they don't like each other, and even though they love each other, and at a certain point on bad days, they just like try to prevent each other from doing things.
Yeah.
They just are critical of the other person, and they try to shut them down, and they're mean to them. And at a certain point, they identify with them or something. It kind of reminds me of how Republicans and Democrats, their signs of, what they do as a show of force, as a way to prove that they're successful, is keep the other group from doing anything. Where it seems like that's how the political cycle works.
Yeah.
Is some new president comes in, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican or a Trump, and the other party tries to keep them from doing functionally anything while they're in office. And then they go and try to get elected on that because they were able to stop the scary bad man or maybe woman at some point from mucking everything up. You know what I mean? And that is politics in our country at this point. And
that's unfortunate.
We wonder why we never get anything done.
Think about that. Think about what you just said, because you're right. Where one party says, we have to play defense. And in playing defense, we need to stop them from getting their agenda accomplished, because if they do, the moment that they get their agenda accomplished, they can turn around and say, hey, we got our agenda accomplished.
And look at what's actually, just to extend the metaphor a little bit, then it's like one of the partners, and pretty soon both of them, they do the like moral high ground thing where they're just like, well, can't we just work together?
Right.
And then they use that as like a tool, as like an abusive tool to drag the other person's face through the dirt, completely ignoring how they have refused to work with the other person whenever they were given the opportunity to. You see what I'm saying?
Well, and it's very strange, because you would think that everybody is aware, everybody saw it, and yet they blissfully act like it didn't take place.
They don't
like
do that.
McConnell
Yeah,
came out and he was like, Joe Biden is going to screw with the bipartisanship that we experienced earlier in the year. You mean when people raided the Capitol, when they tried to take over the Capitol? Is that what you're talking about, when the president got impeached? Like, it's that stuff. And it makes it, honestly, it makes it feel less serious.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes it feel like this is a scam, if this makes sense. It's like you have people who are basically making $18,000 a year for raising a kid, and you guys are out here playing this nonsense.
Yes, and they are playing it. And that's what's screwed up even at the deeper level about this, which is, okay, we're watching this. Everything I just described that we were just talking about is in some sense the theatrical, like what the projector is projecting onto. It's the fabric. What's actually going on is they're mostly okay. It's not like you see politicians getting, at least that we can see, seriously depressed. It's not like they're like trying their hardest and they're like really giving it all and they're making a martyr out of themselves and they burn themselves to a crisp trying. They seem to live functional, good lives. They seem to make money and they probably get along with most of the other people that they have to spend their time with.
Why wouldn't they?
So all of that drama is presented to us to make us vote for them.
Yes.
Well, what's sickening, of course, is that at the end of the day, they live functionally, they live okay while the whole society crumbles.
They go back, get a beer.
Yeah.
They say bad things about the other person for theatrical reasons. Because, I mean, think about it for yourself for the moment. You know that there is this thing that you project, and you know the thing that is. And everybody knows that because everybody operates on some level like that. The political parties, on some level, get each other, even though they're competitors. Like if I'm sitting across from an opponent or something like that, you know, you guys are football players. Yes, you're going to try to kill the quarterback, but you're also going to go get a beer with the quarterback after.
Who are you going to have the most in common with?
Exactly. Who's going to understand you? It's like only your enemies come to your funerals. That type of stuff. It's like this tragedy, and only my enemies cared. Those are the people who knew you. But let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live at our station in Washington, D.C. So there was pretty momentous news with the granting of the Food and Drug Administration granting approval on Monday for the first treatment for Alzheimer's in nearly 20 years. Now, this was somewhat of a landmark decision that has been eagerly awaited, especially those that have been diagnosed by the condition who haven't necessarily found drugs to be effective on this. The new medicine is called Adulim. It is first to attack what people believe is an underlying cause of the disease and slow cognitive decline, although marginally. We're going to have a conversation on this because there's also a bit of controversy around, I guess you could say, the means or the mechanism by which this was approved. To have a conversation, we're joined with Michael or Dr. Mikhail Kogan. He's a medical director at George Washington Center for Integrative Medicine, associate professor of medicine at George Washington University, and the founder and executive director of the AIM Health Institute, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit delivering integrative services to the undeserved. Dr. Kogan, welcome back to the show, man. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning. It's been a while.
Yes. So this has been, I guess some people would say exciting, that they get the opportunity to have something that may work, especially if you have a relative or if you yourself, I would imagine any arrow in the quiver, whether it's significant or marginal, will be something that those people will, will definitely welcome. Especially in a situation where people reaction to the drug will vary. So you may have some people that may vary, where they strongly react to it in a positive way, and other people may not necessarily react at all. So I would imagine it's welcome news. What is this drug, and why has it been 20 years before they've cleared a drug for Alzheimer's?
Well, first of all, let me give a 30-second disclaimer. Finally, I can feel comfortable talking about a topic quite a lot about, because this is actually just in line with my main expertise. I'm actually been involved in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease for a long time, and I'm sure, or I hope we'll get to talk a little bit about not just this drug, because I actually don't think that's a long conversation, but because there are other alternatives now to this drug and other treatments. So I think we should try to touch upon that. But yeah, so this is I think the excitement here is mostly because of just one thing. Just because there hasn't been any approved FDA drug for Alzheimer's disease for 20 years. And I think that's just by that alone, there's a sheer volume of excitement because finally we're getting somewhere, so to speak.
Yeah, but does it, you said it's a short conversation. So let's have the short conversation first, and then let's get into the Alzheimer's part.
Well, the short conversation is that the majority of us who have been in this field for a long time and know about this drug, and, in fact, I've been following this drug for quite some time, not just as a, just like everybody else, reading the news and reading the studies, but also talking to the company. And, we had several of their presentations at the university, et cetera. So I think a lot of people, myself included, are quite surprised that the drug was approved. The data for the approval is extremely weak. There's been basically two studies. One was marginally positive, one was negative. And so I think based on that, my understanding of FDA is basically said, look, something is better than nothing. And there probably is a cohort of patients who are going to benefit from this drug. And while we don't exactly know yet who those patients are, let's approve it and collect more data and see what happens. So I think from that perspective, it's probably reasonable approval. The problem is not just the cost. You guys are already all aware that the drug is going to be at $56,000 a year before taking into account a need for the infusions monthly. So it's an infusion drug. It's not an oral drug. It's a once-a-month infusion that must be done under supervision of physician in the office. which means that there's going to be a charge by a doctor, charge by the facility, infusion charge, and then you
money all around.
have all year round, and then you also have to have all year round multiple MRIs and of the brain, and that's another charge.
This seems way over the top. Like, this seems man.
Well,
it's one thing if it cured Alzheimer's. That's not doing this.
No.
I mean, they're saying it's marginal.
no, but Alzheimer's, it's a serious
It's a
disease.
serious degenerative disease. I get it. But he just said that there are other treatments
Yeah.
that they could be used for Alzheimer's. And he's like, because it's one thing if we're having a conversation about this, like, yeah, Alzheimer's is horrible. It's like, yes,
It is
we need to do
horrible.
anything that we have at our ability. Yes.
Yeah.
And then it's like there are other treatments. And then they start adding stuff that make this implausible or.
A lot of, I mean, if this is the price,
Yeah.
Dr.
Go ahead,
Kogan,
Dr. Kogan, please.
yeah, and Dr. Kogan specifically, I want to hear, how does this fit into the sort of panoply, or the armory of different treatment options? If you're going to respond to Alzheimer's, which
Right.
everybody who gets it fears they have it, they start, usually they start thinking, what the hell do I do about this? Because at a certain point, for as long as you're aware of it, you're aware that you're losing a lot of capacity, and that's a really deeply sort of traumatizing thought for people. So I know people who have suffered from it and family members. It's a big thing. How does this new treatment fit into what doctors currently recommend for it, and what are the treatments that are currently on the table? How close does it seem we are to a cure? I know that's another question completely, but what are the treatments like for it right now, and how does this fit into them, Dr. Kogan?
Right. Well, so this drug is quite different from everything we had before, and I think that's also another reason why FDA approved it. So this drug actually attacks what we call a plaque. So the plaque is the pathological hallmark of the Alzheimer's disease. If you look at someone's brain with Alzheimer's disease, they're going to have this protein aggregates we call them plaques. There are more complex names to that, but just let's call them plaque. So this drug, it actually can destroy the plaques. The problem is that the idea of the plaque is causing the disease is outdated. There's a lot of people who believe, that's in myself included, that the plaques are not the problem, that the plaques are a protective mechanism of the body to take away toxins, store them, and minimize damage.
Oh, kind of like in the heart, like plaque in the heart, where they think cholesterol. People, and initially they used to think cholesterol was the issue, and they was like, well, cholesterol was response, not the thing.
Kind of like that, but there's still been a lot of belief that the plaques themselves are also a bad idea. They gunking up the brain, they slowing the process down, they killing cells, and that's actually not very clear, by the way. So there's been other drugs in the past that have attempted to get rid of the plaques, and none of them worked. In fact, all of them spectacularly failed with a lot of complications. And this drug, just before we move to other treatments, also has serious side effects, bleeding and the swelling of the brain. That's why you have to do MRI, and the chances of that are real. They're not like 1 in a million. They're actually several percentage points. So, that's why you have to constantly follow. Now, the other drugs that are currently approved, they work very differently. They all stimulate in some way, well, not all, but one category. They stimulate production of or capacity of having acetylcholine, which is the neurotransmitter that allows for us to sort of pass the information along the nerves, right? So that's one mechanism. And then there's another mechanism which sort of quiets down or enhances the channels that allow for the signals to travel. So there are several different mechanisms. Now, what's interesting that this is the only, if you believe that the plaques are the kind of a core pathology that's causing the Alzheimer's, this is the first drug approved that supposedly gets to the mechanism. The problem is that, myself included, and a lot of experts think, look, that's still not a pathology process. This is the hallmark, the end of the pathology process. So you're intervening. If you're trying to destroy these plaques, it's kind of too late. You should have tried to prevent the plaque from forming.
I know, but the destruction of the plaque would still have the same effect. Like if my car engine is gunked up, like let's say I live my entire life, I eat everything that I want, I smoke everything that I want, I do all of that stuff, and I get aged, elderly, ill. If they clean out all of that stuff, if you had a magical pill where you can take it, it just cleans out your lungs, cleans out your brain, cleans out the plaque, would the person be born anew? So I get your point. Like you want to get to the disease process that's causing it, but if you could also nix the end result.
I think you somehow already know what I'm going to talk next, because you led me perfectly to how we actually can successfully treat Alzheimer's, and the current data that we do have, which I will talk to next, that's out there. So, and frankly, it is mostly about lifestyle and removing the things that have led to the Alzheimer's. And thank God we know about most of them. There's about 30 different pathways.
Dr. Kogan, but that means that I'm going to have to live my life in a way of restraint. I want to be able to drink my liquor, to smoke the weed and DMT or whatever else that you can get in DC, and do that for 40 years. And I want you to be able to fix me after that. I don't want, meaning the whole point of it is the end around. It's the magic of it. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's like, all right, what if you get rid of the plaque? Meaning, I get your point. All things being equal, what is it? Ounce of prevention is worth 1,000 pounds of cure. Totally agree. But to catch it,
actually, you can reverse it. So there is now pathways to reversal of Alzheimer's that have nothing to do with medicine. And so if we can talk about this again, if we have more time. But I'll be really short to kind of summarize. So this is work of Dr. Dale Bredesen, and he's a memory expert from the University of California. And years ago, he kind of put together this synergistic protocol that's now called RECODE protocol, developed by this company called Apollo Health. And what they did is they basically said, look, let's put it all together, feed the data into the computer on each individual to tell us what are the drivers in a given person that are causing Alzheimer's. So they did this, and they're publishing the study. They have 84% reversal rate. So they took 25 people, put them on this protocol, and they saw 84% reversal of Alzheimer's disease. We've never seen anything like this. Now, they only took people who are early in Alzheimer's, and they run it only for 9 months. So
go into that. What are the drivers? I mean, what were they seeing in the protocols that were basically driving the disease process?
Toxicity. Now, you mentioned a few things. Alcohol, if you take too much, it can lead to it. But then there's lots of environmental toxins, mercury, pesticides, other heavy metals, molds. So like a toxic mold can lead to Alzheimer's-like disease. Lyme disease can lead to Alzheimer's-like disease. So there's a whole gamut of different things. Now, that's not typically the only driver.
Oh, wait, hang on for a second. You were saying Alzheimer's-like disease there.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you're describing a class of symptoms associated with the symptoms, we think of when we think of Alzheimer's, like long-term brain degeneration, progressive memory loss, those kinds of things. But it's like you're describing, I guess I wanted to, pause on that. You're not describing Alzheimer's. You're describing a whole class of symptoms caused by a bunch of different things. The brain responding in the same way to all, or similar ways to all of these different substances and factors. Is that right?
Correct. But at the end, we are calling this Alzheimer's.
Yes, I see.
All basically the same. It's a different pathways that lead to the same end point. If you look at them early on, they may look a little different, but we have no capacity to look at them 20 years ahead. We're looking at them all in manifestations many years later. So so this are some of the things you may not even have heard of. Now, other things like hypertension, diabetes, vascular disease, all leading to Alzheimer's, you already know. So this is what science and medicine have been trying to treat, saying, look, we really have to prevent Alzheimer's disease. And the common kind of fully appreciated and highly endorsed idea by Alzheimer's Association, by CDC, by everybody, that we can probably prevent up to 30-40% of all the cases of Alzheimer's if we modify people's lifestyles. So, sure, cut down on alcohol. If you have high blood pressure, control it. You did mention cannabis. Give a little bit of a positive spin here. There's actually no data that cannabis can lead to Alzheimer's.
Good to hear. Good to hear. But it sounds like they're radically cynical compared to. I mean, if you were describing what was it, an 84% recovery rate, and what we didn't even get into, what was the protocol? You're talking about Apollo Health.
Oh, the protocol is Apollo Health. The protocol is quite complicated. Your diet is very different. Your diet is intermittent fasting in combination with called a ketoflex diet, which is for about 12 hours every day you eat nothing, and then for the rest of the time you try to eat the diet, which is pretty low in carbohydrates, so to get close to ketotics.
So you're talking about intermittent fasting and keto there?
Well, sort of. Like, it's more complicated than that. I'm just running through this quickly. You do that. You have to do certain brain exercises. You have to do physical exercise. Physical activity is critical.
Wait, brain exercise. Are you talking about like puzzles? What kinds of things are you talking about there?
Puzzles, Brain HQ, Luminosity. There's a whole bunch of things now. But now, if you really just love your dancing or chess or learning new language, those are
really
exercises. Yep. So go learn chess. I'll play with you on chess.
Hey, with Jamarl
that's
here.
funny.
Jamarl here, growing up.
Yeah, I've been playing since I was 12 years old. Tournament chess.
Okay.
Well, I haven't played in a while though. That's not true. I haven't played tournament chess in a while. It's a different.
He does
standard.
Blitz on his YouTube channel.
Yeah, right. I would play Blitz.
But anyway, no, that makes perfect sense. So you're describing, physiological therapies, lifestyle changes. They're eating certain things. You're describing brain exercises, basically learning new things. Physical exercise, I mean, if you're dancing, if you're physically moving, I'm guessing that contributes. But did they have them on a regimen? I'm just trying to get a sort of rounded up picture of the protocol here, Dr. Kogan.
Then, so you're doing all those things you just mentioned, but then you also address the drivers. So you look at each individual, which requires you collecting lots of blood work and actually other tests, where you look at everybody's drivers and you say, okay, well, this person has low vitamin B12, and they have hypothyroid, and they have mercury toxicity, and they have mold toxicity. I'm telling you actually what I also see. So you could have with one person 5, 6, 7 pretty serious drivers, and you have to fix them all. And this is why this sort of falls completely out of the realm of current medicine, because how do you study something like this, right? I mean, we usually, in our studies like this drug we just discussed, well, it's pretty easy. You do a drug or the placebo. Here, you can't really do that because you have like 20 different interventions, or actually we often say 35, on each patient. There's really no way to control, study this unless you simply say, look, each person with Alzheimer's is going to get worse. And we know about that. So that's sort of what we call an N of 1. So if I reversed one case, and now 25 cases in the control settings, meaning that they are constantly followed by the research team. They're assessed at every point that is designed. The study was approved by institutional review board. So this is a real assessment. Now, my own clinic, we're seeing a lower recovery rate. And we have a 70% response rate with only about 35% recovering and 35% not progressing. But we've done this data collection over about 3 years now. Just over 2.5 years. So, which means that we're also seeing a pretty dramatic improvement, and our cohort is bigger. We have 44 patients. So, but again, see, we have also very different results, and I think the key is because in the study that Dale and his team ran, they had money to do a pretty aggressive support. In our cohort, we have a caregiver. People who have a lot of money, then they can afford a personal trainer and the dietitian and nutritionist. But, most people can't do that. So they are kind of skipping on certain steps. So they're just not doing certain things as aggressive as I would like them to do.
And that sounds very much like a doctor who wants their patients to do more. And it's good of you. That's in part your job, I think. Although, Jamarl, I know you personally have resisted doctors' orders occasionally in order to travel around the world. And I can't blame you for that either. Dr. Kogan, Dr. Kogan, I have been in the past an adherent to the keto diet. I've gone even further. I've done carnivore for periods of time and experienced positive symptoms, far more positive than negative symptoms from even that more extreme diet, but also certainly keto. So I'm a bit biased in that way, which is why I feel the need to ask the sort of more skeptical question. You said N of 25. You said these smaller Ns, even though it was approved by the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, even though it has that, kind of imprimatur or something like that, that level of proof. I know that there are a bunch of different takes on diet out there. How conclusive is it that, the keto element specifically, because you know how nutrition is these days. It's like 1,000 different fads and movements. If you had to back it up, what would you say? What's your take there, Dr. Kogan?
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. So if you take it each piece of this whole complexity of what we're calling a RECODE protocol, each piece has a little bit of science backing, and some pieces have actually a lot. So controlling hypertension, diabetes have a lot of backing. The problem is not necessarily that I think there's zero evidence in keto diet for Alzheimer's. Actually, there is some evidence. I think the problem is that having an idea that one diet fits all is going to somehow fix everything is just wrong at the core. Personally, the way I see this, a lot of people just have really hard time tolerating this diet, and that's number one. Number two, it's actually not going to work for everybody. There are certain genetic types of the patients with Alzheimer's disease that we're working with for whom ketogenic diet is not a good thing. I think it's way too go far into detail to go, unless you guys want to bring me back and then we'll discuss this in a much greater detail. But there are certain genetic types that are probably not going to be served well by keto. But in general, I think it's a better diet than what we call a SAD. You guys, of course, know what that
standard American diet.
Diet, that's the keto would be a keto that what we often call keto vegan or similar to that. So where most of your fats are actually not coming from animal sources, but they're coming from plants, like let's say olive oil as a majority of your fat.
It seems like
vegetables.
This is unsettling on some level. It's I guess it's good, but it's also unsettling on some level. It seems that our life and the lives that we've established for ourselves basically make us sick, and that the capabilities of trying to get well would be a repudiation of that life in order to get well. Meaning if you had, let's say the public was told, look, we can get rid of your heart disease, we can get rid of your Alzheimer's, we can get rid of your cancer. We just need you to be basically a vegan. We need you to work out X amount of times during the day, and we need you to do this routine over the course of, 2 years. How many people could do it? As opposed to...
And also, who's going to pay for that?
Who's going to pay for it? And most people would say, just give me the surgery and the drug. That's what they're going to say. Like, I mean, yes, you're going to have some who say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to stand there and do it because Alzheimer's matters that much more to me.
But let's take a look at this a little differently. Let me spin it around on the head and put it differently. Okay, let's say the society is going to pay $50,000 per person per year for whatever the treatment that the patient's doctor believes in. So the society is going to give this patient $50,000. You know how much the whole protocol actually costs, including all the food, including all the supplements, which there, by the way, a ton. There are at least $200-300 a month of supplements, and actually some patients take a lot more than that, including all the tests and everything. I mean, we're going to be way less than $50,000. And I'm talking about everything. That includes food, paying a coach to do the exercise, paying coach to help patient with the nutrition. So all of this together, involving a whole bunch of people, employing tons of people to support the patient, the caregiver, everything will be under $50,000.
But where does that extra money go? I know we normally don't talk politics, Dr. Kogan, but I'm sure you see this stuff up close and personal. I bet that a lot of times the incentive is to go with the more expensive package, even if it's not as efficient. Not just because it's a time saver for the patient, and not just because it's probably easier to carry through from beginning to finish because you're not relying so much on patient willpower, but just because it's more dollars in more pockets. Correct. Dr. Kogan.
Correct. I mean, that's simply true. Now, I'm not necessarily in a position to say this drug shouldn't be on the market. I disagree with that. I think we need every possible treatment out there. I'm putting that as a philosophical challenge to the society to say enough. We have been trying to think of Alzheimer's disease as a drug, an outcome positive. No, the problem with that is Alzheimer's disease is an exceedingly complex condition. One of the analogies that Dr. Dale Bredesen often gives is that 35 holes in the roof. So you have leakage from multiple points, and until you fix, say, 20 of them or 25 of them, the disease will keep progressing. The drug can only address one or two at the same time. You either have to have a cocktail of drugs for all kinds of things, but the reality is there's no such cocktail. Even if you take every existing currently approved FDA-approved drug and give them all together, they're still not going to achieve a whole lot because instead of, one pathway will address three pathways.
Basically, it's a complicated problem where comorbidities interact with one another, creating other issues.
Disease that highlights one critical aspect of which I've talked with you guys in the past multiple times. We're reaching the limit of modern medicine in chronic conditions. We have to start looking at chronic illnesses, not from the standpoint of a diagnosis treatment, but from standpoint what is driving the illness. and then look at the biochemistry of a driver and say, now, how do we fix that drive?
Dr. Kogan, we're going to have to kill this here. But, man, I appreciate this conversation.
And I agree with that last comment, too. I agree with that take on medicine. I think we're in the early stages of medicine still. And it's a little bit hard to realize because we have made our progress. But actually understanding the signals processing going on in the body, understanding how everything fits together, it's a very complicated system. And it's so unique per person. But we need to close this segment out and this hour out. You guys have been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're coming back with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Kogan. That was a great conversation. Shane mentioned I typically don't get along with my doctors all that well. This is the whole thing of individuality versus their need to get people to do X or to Y. Missing the fact that the larger existence of the individual matters more. That person does everything that he's supposed to do and it drops dead at 80. What did it matter? It didn't matter anything. The person just wasted their lives. But Kogan has a great, affable way of having conversations, explaining this stuff, and he says things that is just right. If you knew that the human body had certain things that gave it an ideal condition of health, and that those things basically were repudiated by our society, what do you do about that? Now, the catch becomes, what is the point of life? Does humanity in and of itself and your ability to live and grow and all of that stuff have anything to do with that kind of point of life? Or is that entirely imposed or entirely chosen? Meaning, is that something that a society chooses? Or is that something that a society is kind of imposed upon it? What I mean by that is, when Kogan is explaining this, what matters? What is value? And there's something to be said that the human being is value. Should it matter to us? Should we, ourselves, matter to us? I think the answer is yes. But that's not the way we function. We function in this way that is dramatic, in the way that we are perfectly okay with undermining the person just to operate. It's very strange. When he's saying, like heart disease, there was a doctor that I was following where the guy said, we have been able to basically eliminate, let's say, like 80% of surgeries from heart disease. And then he goes into how, and he's talking about diet, he's talking about the regimen, et cetera, et cetera. He sounds a lot more like Dr. Kogan is saying there. That basically, look, we can eliminate most of the surgeries for this, but we need somewhat of a strict regimen for the person to do it, because this person has basically done whatever they wanted 50 years. And now they've come to me with a broken body that is broken in multiple ways. And now I need to find a way to kind of piece this person back together. And it's not as simple as, okay, take this pill, take this drug, and et cetera. It takes concerted effort, and effort in a way that is not necessarily easiest thing in the world for the individual to do, and especially on their own. And that even is beyond the economic part. I mean, even if you had all of the ends, having to be able to get up and do the training, drinking the whatever that stuff is, being there for this particular treatment or that treatment, getting this infusion, that infusion, that it's a life at that point that gets sucked into that. And it's like, all right, so if my life is this, how am I paying, this? Or how am I hanging out with my kid? And how am I doing? You have all of these other things that fill up a life. And then all of a sudden that stuff comes to a halt all at once. And said, all right, you have Alzheimer's, now you need to fix that. Or you have heart disease, you need to fix that. And they say, all right, you have all of this regimen that you can do for a year, or you can get the surgery, or you can get this pill.
And the lead up to it is all socially incentivized
Yes,
and
all of
advertised
it.
to them.
All of it.
And it's so often, in the vast majority of cases, it is driven by profit incentivized behavior. It's
Yes,
driven,
because you
it's
are
driven
not
by
going to get the
corporations.
conversation that Kogan just had.
You're not going to get those
not gonna get that
advertisements
out of your doctor.
telling the kids to eat the foods they shouldn't eat at any point in their lives, let
Right.
alone as kids. You're not going to get the advertisements, telling people they should be out more.
Well, those are
You're gonna get
disincentivized.
PSAs.
I mean,
You're
think
gonna
about
get-
McDonald's. If you're for McDonald's has an explicit interest in
Yeah.
getting kids hooked on their food at 4 years old. They don't have to beat the kid over the head. They don't have to do any of that stuff. They know if that kid, once it gets a taste, is going to
And it's-
immediately come back over and over again. They're
Yeah,
going to see
it's
the
okay
golden-
to be angry about it. It's
Yeah.
okay to be angry at the fact that there are specific people who have made it their livelihood to make other people sick,
Yes.
ill, kill them effectively,
And eventually die, yes.
It's okay to be angry about that.
Yes.
It's okay to be angry about that. And it's okay to make that want to stop, and we should make it stop
Yes.
because it's disgusting. People are paid. I get it. Okay, whatever. You're just a person trying to
You're
get
just doing a
people to
job,
buy
man.
your
Just
burgers.
doing a job.
You're just
I've
doing a
liked the
job.
kid. Yeah,
but
that's-
I hope you have nightmares
right.
because you
Right,
make
right.
you make people ill. You do that to a lot of people, and it's a class of people. It's a class of advertisers. As human beings, it is despicable, and it's okay to be angry about there being a class of people that gets paid to do that.
Unfortunately, it's not just the person. They're incentivized to do that stuff. They're in it, and in their head, they would
It's
say, "Hey, man,
incentives
if
all
it's
the way
not
down,
me,
man.
there'd be
It's-
another guy to do it."
It's yeah,
all
here
the
you-
way
It's
downstream.
incentives all the way down,
All the
like
way
just like
downstream.
it's turtles all the way down. But at a certain point, you got to boil that shell and suck out that sweet turtle flesh. You got to remake the way things are, Jamarl.
All right, let's get the headlines. Let's get the headlines.
All right.
I enjoyed the conversation with Kogan. That's all.
All right.
All right, in the news, about 15,048 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 373 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 14,031 cases per day, a decrease of 42% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 42%, secret to life, of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 52% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,398,000 human beings across the United States and has killed 598,000 people. For the first time since last year, cafes and restaurants in France are now once again allowed to serve customers indoors. Excellent. The Senate passed Endless Frontier Act yesterday, an industrial policy bill aimed at increasing research into investment opportunities. The White House yesterday announced a plan to use the Defense Production Act to mass produce medical goods that are in short supply in the United States. This announcement follows a 100-day review of the country's supply chain undertaken following the passage of an executive order signed this February that tasked the administration with inspecting 4 areas of the American economy: pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, large capacity batteries, and rare and critical minerals. Washington State is incentivizing vaccines with marijuana. Yes, it's true. The program is called Joints for Jabs. It gives out a free joint to anyone who gets a vaccine. The state has already hit 70% vaccination and is pushing for 100%. I love goals. Let's just max that goal out. We're going to give away free weed for vaccines. I love that. I love that. And they're like, we're planning on hitting 100%. That's our objective. They're not going with the modest 90 or the modest 80. We're going to get everybody vaccinated. Free weed. I love that. That's just so funny. I love it. And just the things that these guys are thinking about in various states. West Virginia, Coal Town, guns, pickup trucks, etc. You get this place, Weed Town, we're giving away weed. Wow. New day. Beijing hit back at the Senate's passage of the Endless Frontier Act, an industrial plan just passed by the Senate, often cast as a way to accelerate American innovation in its competition with China. The Foreign Affairs Committee of the Nobel People's Congress of China
National People's Congress of China.
The Foreign Affairs Committee of the People's Congress of China said the language in the bill is full of Cold War thinking and ideological prejudice, saying that the bill attempts to exaggerate the so-called, quote, China threat, unquote, to maintain the U.S. global hegemony, interfere in China internal affairs under the pretext of human rights and religion, and deprive China's right to develop through technology and economic decoupling. We need to come back to that. That statement is so true, and yet, so what? Meaning, we'll come. Put a pin in that one. That's a milk pump. At least 10 people involved in the mining clearance operations in an Afghanistan province have been shot dead, with local officials blaming the Taliban, which has denied involvement. Judges meeting in Moscow could today label Alexei Navalny's organization as extremist. Israeli airstrikes on the city of Damascus in Syria are said to have caused the deaths of about 5 government soldiers and 3 allied soldiers. That's according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a one-man outfit based in the UK that says it uses hundreds of anonymous sources in Syria that has no oversight from outside parties, but nevertheless has a catchy name and that everybody considers the word of God. And last, El Salvador has adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, making it the first country in the world to make the cryptocurrency an official currency, which visitors can use to make purchases from businesses, and residents can even use to pay their taxes. The IMF, International Monetary Fund, meanwhile, has discussed this move critically, wondering publicly how this move would affect the body's lending to El Salvador. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Man, I love politics, and I love international politics that much more because, like you said, the backstop is always war. But within the context of that, those countries don't really want to get into a war unless they know they can win that war. Meaning, I don't really want to fight you unless I know I can win without too much damage to myself. And if there is going to be damage to myself, then we're going to need to negotiate. There may be bellicosity. There may be me threatening you to try to influence you and everything else. But basically, it's not the intention of a fight. The intention is advantage. When China is making this argument in the statement, everything that they're saying is right in the statement. But so what? From a U.S. perspective, hey, buddy, you guys did well. You came up with a great plan of action in regards to make your country that much better. We wasted a lot of our money in these wars and everything else. All right, new day. I'm Joe Biden. I'm going to save America. And so what I am going to do is I am going to ratchet up this competition. And I'm going to do so in a way that is going to do it in a way that America knows. The Cold War. We're going to put this thing in space. We're going to get, we're going to get to the moon. And Kennedy is going to give his freedom speech and all this other stuff when really it's this kind of Cold War rhetoric back and forth. China is pointing that out. And China is right in what it is saying and pointing it out. But that's China's perspective. The U.S. has a different perspective. It would be very weird and bizarre for people who are leading a country to allow that country to fall into the ether. They're not going to do it. The U.S. doesn't even sees itself that way. It sees this stuff as existential, and this notion that China is taking the lead in world domination, world affairs, and everything else. So yeah, from Joe Biden's perspective, we need to do everything that we can to mitigate China and give the U.S. the best potential to compete going forward. That's what Biden is doing. I don't like the rhetoric in this bill. And I really do think that you can have this kind of competition and you can have this kind of competition on a human level in regards to countries without getting it this kind of disgusting, oh, you're committing genocide and you're doing this and you're doing that. But basically, China is basically pointing out reality and saying, hey, you guys are trying to screw with our ability to grow. And the U.S. says, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. Because your ability to grow puts us in the second seat and we're not going to accept that. Now, is the U.S. wrong for taking that tack and perspective? No. No more wrong than China is in growing. Meaning China has every right in the world to grow. And there's nothing that should stop it any more than something was going to stop the U.S. from growing. The difference is the U.S. had the benefit, in quotes, of the Second World War where everybody else was basically destroyed and it could just kind of run the table. Well, in this case, you have China who basically came out of, civil wars, came out of being the Opium Wars, the knocked over Civil War, etc. And it's gotten to the point of being, all right, we're a competitor. We had a good plan of action. The U.S. is not wrong for trying to compete. The catch is, what does it mean? And that's the part where I think it gets wrong, not in the basis. What are your thoughts? It's just funny to me that China's like, whoa, you guys are doing all of this stuff and are trying to stop us from doing this. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. And the same way your plan of action was able to give you an advantage, why wouldn't the U.S. do something similar? Any country would.
Yeah. Well, and China has had for a couple of decades now a fairly effective group of elites who've managed to consolidate and hand down power. They have a much more consolidated and, this is the narrative, and this is the part of the narrative that seems to me undeniably true. They're more authoritarian in the sense that they have more centralized state power and that they don't need to respond as much to the public, either the whims of the public, if I want to dismiss them, or the most heartfelt expression and the pursuit of human rights and all these things. They don't need to pay attention to that as much, which means that the group of elites who are in charge there are just simply a more competent group of elites than the ones that are currently at odds with each other, and in some cases warring, in other cases working with each other over here in the United States. So if you strip away the veneers of ideology the aristocrats over in China are doing a better job than the aristocrats in the United States. All else aside. Now, what adds irony to this is that
By aristocrats, you don't mean money. You mean just power.
I mean power, yeah, in the truest
economic,
in the
or
truest sense.
Geopolitical.
Although aristocrats,
I guess what I'm saying is, it's one thing to say aristocrats in the States.
But
what does it mean in the communist country?
Yeah, well, the whole point about an aristocracy is that it's kind of generationally inherited wealth. Yeah. You have aristocracy. Aristotle would put it as aristocracy is a sort of functional form of oligarchy, where oligarchy is where things get dysfunctional, and aristocracy, that's Aristotle. Yeah, right. Aristocracy broadly is, in my opinion, where you have it has to do with lineages, it has to do with families, it has to do with, when you add competency to aristocracy, this is getting too deep into political philosophy. When you add competency to aristocracy, you get like something a little bit closer to an oligarchy, I guess, but there's a continuum between these two things. My point is, both countries have theirs. Both countries have their elites. There's no point beating around the bush about it. Yeah. We're run by them. That's how this works. The democracy is a veneer, and the ideology, sadly, blinds us to the fact that we are inevitably always going to be, at least, until there's some major deep revolution or something, and the way that things work, we're always going to be run by elites. Yeah. There's always going to be a class of people who are only minutely responsive to the public's opinion because they always grab the reins of power. That's the problem with elections. It's a problem with democracy at this point. We've gotten so blinded by the ideological convictions that we have forgotten that at the end of the day, we're just people. We think that we have power. The power is systematically kept at bay from us and taken up every election by the elites. That's kind of an aside. But my point is that the ideological part of that has blinded us to the fact that what's simply going on with China is they've got more competent people in charge. Yeah. And we don't over here in the United States. And with this industrial policy thing, you're right. What would be so much more effective, it's not that we don't have a right to do this or that they don't have a right to try to ascend and we don't have a right to try to keep them down. All that aside, whatever, I just don't think it's going to work. I don't think that the tack that the American politicians are taking, the kinds of assumptions they're making, are bold enough, are sort of single-minded enough.
It's that.
Again, I want to come back to which is why I set it up in these terms, because I don't usually talk about them on the show. I wish that we had more competent elites. Yeah. I don't need to be one of them. I don't need them all to look a certain way. It would be good if they all think a bit more a certain way, where whatever that way is more competence. But you get my point. I want better people in charge. And here's the wonderful thing, Jamarl. I get to complain about them from Washington, D.C., the capital of where all these people are ostensibly in charge around the face of the earth. We need to close this segment out, I suppose. Let's do it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back into a dedicated segment, Jamarl's bringing us in Bad Takes of the Week. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, when I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join us on a conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-4639. 1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. There were a lot of what I like to call bad takes. And bad takes just either in interviews or conversations that people are having that are in media, and what they mean, what they're trying to imply, and whether it could have went a little bit better. Kamala Harris had an opportunity to have a sit down with Lester Holt. And there are this conversation, this back and forth, the scene or the conversation that I'm going to show you is bad on several fronts. But just to give reference to what we're talking about, Kamala Harris is supposedly the one who's taking up the mantle of the immigration issue within the context of the administration. We're at the helm of an active VP going back to, Dick Cheney with George Bush. And so that has been basically the modern American VP. Kamala Harris takes on the immigration issue. So, of course, people are going to ask her questions about immigration. Now, the other day, she was at a press conference, and let's play the clip. I think we played this clip yesterday where Kamala Harris is basically telling people to stay out of America. Let's play this clip just to give you some context before we go into the clip with Lester Holt.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back.
You believe it or you know it? Which one is it? Do not come. Do not come. Okay. Now, Kamala Harris is being grilled by one Lester Holt on this issue. Let's play the clip.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
Kamala, we cut it. Just go to the damn border. So they can stop asking you a stupid question. Yeah, just shut them up. You don't even have to pay for your ticket. Just go. And I get it that this has got you. It's a ridiculous question. Did you go to the border? As if the theatrics that are going to take place with Kamala Harris dancing at the border means or translates into actual policy or actual some kind of change. It's a got you. And he's only even asking her that because Republicans are badgering him about that very specific question. And he's asking her like this is a serious question. Hey, why don't you go to the border and be theatrical for us? Well, I can be theatrical here, Lester. Yeah, but it's not the same. And it's this weird convo where it's like, all right, we're going to hit you with this got you on one side, but it's a got you that doesn't even mean anything. And if anything, it's an optics issue. Their point is, there's a crisis at the border. Why aren't you there? You seem dejected from it. And her point is, what does me being at the border have anything to do with anything at all? Like, and she has a point, right? She's right. But there's nothing else to ask Kamala Harris. Like, is this really, like, you would think that with the money that Lester Holt is paid, well paid, very well paid, with the pomp and circumstance associated with this, it's the vice president of the United States. I mean, she could have people killed if she becomes president. She could credibly become president within a few years. And have you seen Biden recently? Become president tomorrow. Not wishing anything bad on Biden. I'm just making a point. He's up there.
Seriously, have you seen him recently?
Yeah.
Because I haven't seen him in a couple of weeks.
Well, you know what I mean.
I'm worried he got lost. No,
right, on the way back.
We've seen him recently.
He was like at an ice cream shop or something like that yesterday.
That sounds exactly.
Or a few days ago.
Exactly where you'd expect him to be.
Exactly.
Exactly where you'd expect him to be.
It's an ice cream shop.
Yeah.
But that's it. But you get my point.
Hopefully they have a soda fountain too. Just to relive the memories of the late 50s,
of the
early
late 50s and 60s,
Yes,
of those soda
exactly.
shops.
Anyway.
But yeah, she could credibly be president. So this is not a throwaway interview. And this is what he comes up with. Why didn't you go to the border, Kamala? And she's like, what are you trying to get at? Like, what is your point? What is your point? This is bad on so many levels. I don't care if Kamala Harris goes to the border, whether it's theatrics at the border or theatrics not at the border, it's the same. And one last point, she makes the point of saying, I'm trying to get to the root of this. No, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. You don't even bring up the root issues. You wouldn't even get into the drug laws or drug wars. You wouldn't get to the coups, the knocking over the governments. You wouldn't even get into knocking over Honduras just a few years ago, or the influence that we had in regards to Bolivia. We are pretending that Juan Guaido is president of Venezuela, and none of that registers to them of the chaos that keeps showing up at our border. You're not getting to the root of anything unless the law allows her to say that. I'm just like, it's so maddening to watch these. What is your take on that? I mean, how do you regard that? I hate that.
I think the whole thing is theatrical, and therefore, how are we supposed to talk about these things, Jamarl? If it's all for show, because here's the thing: why is Lester Holt asking that question? Because you're right, he gets paid a lot of money.
Yes,
he knows how to do a job, whatever that job is. He's asking that question. I'm guessing at least in part because he knows Kamala's getting hit on this by Republicans.
Exactly.
And so he's giving her a chance to respond to it directly, basically. This is a big issue, something that they're throwing at you. What's your response to it? And she gives her response, whatever.
She gets flustered.
She gets a little bit flustered. Well, I haven't been to the border, but we've gone to the border before.
It's like, but not you.
It's our border.
But not you.
Our government is definitely aware of our border, though. Believe you me, Lester, that we have thought of that border a couple of times. No, she gets a little bit flustered, whatever, but that's theater. She's going down to Guatemala instead of the border because of theater.
Reason. Yeah.
because it's sort of literally it's the spotlight is moving off of the border and onto these other countries.
Right.
No, pay the border no mind. The real problems are down in Guatemala and Honduras and with our Mexican counterparts, but not on the northern part of Mexico, Mexico City, that part of Mexico. We're going to go talk to the diplomats down there. And then, so why did Biden give this task to her? Well, that's theater.
Yeah.
He gave this task to her because he didn't want to deal with it. And he was like, okay,
Lester asked me this question.
I'm going to give this to a figurehead. She'll find some people who will say some words to her to say about it. She'll say those words to the public. We'll get through this one, folks. It's all theater. And then we're left to sort of scratch our heads and remind ourselves that now is not the time to talk about the border. That was a month ago.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that she is saying the exact same words that Trump would have said, you can imagine Trump saying, "Do not come.
Stay out.
Do not come." You can imagine him literally saying the exact same words as her, even with the same pausing and a slightly different intonation. And instead of Lester Holt interviewing her, it would have been whomever over at Fox.
Maria Bartiromo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's all theater.
That's what I mean.
It's all theater.
That's an aggravating process to know that.
And instead of disgust, I just sort of feel empty because it's all theater. And what am I supposed to feel about it? Is this supposed to be real, Jamarl?
I suppose there's shadows on the wall elements. I mean, her getting flustered is probably real. Her knowing that he is doing a job, trying to put a knife in her. She knows that's real. Like, it's like there are elements of it that's real within the context of it.
Here's the thing. I don't even think that he was trying to put a knife in her. I think he was trying to give.
So?
I think that he was trying to give her an opportunity to respond, and she got a little bit flustered while she was figuring out how to respond.
I get the
and then
feel.
he was trying to be like, okay, I'm doing my due diligence. I'm really pushing on it.
Yeah.
And he found out that there wasn't a there. And that's why she responded in that kind of flustered way.
Not know that there wasn't a there before he asked that question?
I think that he expected her to respond better, but for whatever reason, Kamala Harris has a weird, slightly creepy laugh. And when she's put under the spotlight in certain ways that she doesn't expect, she gets stressed. And it's not like she angrily lashes out. She just gets awkward.
That is the angelic version of this. I think Lester Holt has been doing this job for a while. I think, yes, the Republicans were asking the question, but Lester Holt can ask Kamala Harris anything that he wants to ask Kamala Harris. And in that moment, I think on some level, he wants to get a good soundbite. It's in his interest to get a good soundbite. It's in his interest, meaning if she gets flustered because she asked this question, that's in his interest on some level. Lester Holt was like trending on Twitter and everything yesterday. He has to know that. Like, that has to operate in their minds when they're having these interviews, that I want this to be a great interview. And in asking her a question like this, that all of these other Republicans are asking her, I mean, you could be right. I'm not sure. I get the feeling that these guys they try to create tension in the interviews when they're having these interviews, depending upon who they're talking to.
I don't see how it benefits him to put a knife in her. I think, he's with MSNBC.
Right.
Or I believe, is it MSNBC or NBC?
Knife is too strong of a word. I just mean like asking a question that is an aggravating question.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris gets this question. Like, they were asking them this constantly. Like, did he think she was going to give a different answer? Like, what did he think she was going to say being asked this question?
No, I don't know. And I guess what's sickening to me, what does feel a bit sickening, what makes it start to feel a little bit real, is thinking about the people in the newsrooms, the media, who instead of Lester Holt's not asking that question. he's not asking that question out of any real curiosity or anything like that.
No, he's not.
He's not. He's asking that question performatively for not just the public, but for everybody in his class who's watching him. And if you think, okay, he's asking a question, who is listening to the answer?
Right.
What consciousness is listening to the answer? In the media, it seems like what everybody is listening to is, okay, how are other journalists going to respond to this? And what would they think about me if I did this? It is an entirely self-referential little media ecosystem. And I guess that's why I don't see why Lester Holt would benefit from it. But it is a little bit sickening to think about how unreal all of our approach with this stuff is.
Yeah. I think they have an ecosystem. I think they give news that they themselves care about. And I think that's what they put out to the American public. And I think they create a disassociation between what the public cares about versus what they care about. I don't know if they even know the difference.
No.
And so it's like, if you go to the public and say, hey, what do you care about, these items? That's not what they're talking about on mainstream media. Don't get me wrong. The public may attune to it, but that's different than what would the public gravitate towards if it had given his own druthers.
I think you and I are clear, at least, that a lot of what we talk about, it's just us that
we care about it.
we care about it.
Yeah.
We care, some parts of our audience, we can very clearly see, do not care about some of the things that we talk. We talk about philosophy, we talk about Star Trek, and some people do. But I think we're pretty in the clear about the things that, like, okay, these are the ways in which we're weird and different from people. And we try to give nudges and accommodations to, like, the lowest common denominator of this is what you should know about this, in the general sense of the word you. You know what I mean? This is what a person should know about an issue that we're talking about. And we try to give nods to that and give it due deference, but we also just do our thing.
Yeah.
I feel like they genuinely believe, okay,
I think they genuinely
doing our duty. We really, all of the reasonable people watching this at home, we need to give them what they want. Yeah. And they are just so screwed up in the head by watching what everybody else thinks about things. They're so far away from reality. Yeah. And that's a little bit scary and disgusting. And when you earlier talked about the shadows in the wall, that's a Plato reference. Yeah. You're talking about the wall.
Yeah.
As an aside, Jamarl,
I'm saying there might be a reality. I feel like they're there to it, even if it's not an actual.
We should start imposing a cost on ourselves whenever we get into philosophy. Like, we should have like a toga that we have to put on physically before we start talking about anything philosophical, just to make it a little bit harder.
That wasn't me going into philosophy. That was me making I use tangential references to try to explain what I mean.
Yeah, I hear you.
To get it across. And in that case, it's like, well, yeah, these guys are playing an act, but is there some underlying to the act that's deconstructed? No. That's there somewhere for them to even act to behave that way.
No, and it's also okay to be angry at them for falling for it because they should know better. It's true, man. These are people who who get paid a lot of money, and in some cases who we pay money.
Yes.
Who we are taxed to justify their jobs.
Yeah. They're trying to explain reality to us. And unfortunately,
and they
what is that reality? Yeah.
No, they lie to themselves, they lie to us.
Like I said, I never could tell whether they were lying or whether they were incompetent. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's this heaping thing of ideology that's blind spots. That's what I think. I don't know if
ideology and also just frickin' groupthink.
That too,
because there is ideology, but ideology, I don't want to give groupthink the credit of ideology. Yeah. Ideology, even though it may have its inconsistencies, is at least systematic.
Yeah.
But look at the Wuhan virus story. There's no ideological. There might be ideological components, but it's not like the shift in perspective was quote unquote ideological. It was because that was what certain very powerful people were interested in making the change on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like Moses, and I'm not saying ideologies or religions, but it's not like there was like something about Karl Marx and what he wrote, or about capitalism and Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman. Exactly. You see what I'm saying? I don't want to give this the credit of ideology. It's just dumb groupthink.
Let's open the phone lines. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we can open the phone lines. 202-521-1320. We're going to be going over other videos. There is a pipeline CEO saying the ransom, paying it off was the right choice. That just feels weird to me. And there's also Stedler, sycophant, Saki, weirdness. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So we've been going through videos. The Kamala Harris one was utterly hilarious. Her and Lester Holt talking about the border. Are you going into the border? Well, we've been to the border. Well, you didn't go to the border. Well, I don't need to go to the border. I haven't been a year. Yeah. She got a little tense. She wasn't feeling that conversation all that well. So Stetler, Brian Stetler, is having a conversation. Stelter, I believe his name, is having a conversation with Jen Psaki. Now, listen to the question that he opens with in this conversation. Let's play the clip.
Jen, thanks for coming on Reliable Sources.
My pleasure.
Busy summer ahead, infrastructure, election reform. What does the press get wrong when covering Biden's agenda? When you watch the news, when you read the news, what do you think we get wrong?
Well, look, I think some of our muscles have atrophied a little bit over the last few years, and there isn't a lot of memory, or recent memory, or longer memory on how long it takes to get legislation forward, or how messy the process of negotiating and the process of getting legislation across the finish line can be. So we understand everybody's always looking for a deadline, a timeline, things like that. But at the end of the day, our focus is on getting these bills across the finish line, doing it in a bipartisan way if we can. And we certainly recognize that that can be messy along the process. So I don't know if that's the press getting it wrong. I'll leave you to the critique of that, Brian. But I think sometimes we forget how strange the last 4 years were. And when we return to a place where democracy is working, where we're talking with Democrats and Republicans, where we're trying to get bills and legislation passed, it feels foreign. But this is actually how it's supposed to work.
What kind of Jen, what do we get? Beat me, Jen. Beat me on air. Just beat me. Just tell me what we get wrong.
And then at the end, she blames it on Trump.
Isn't that great?
That's what she does at the end.
What a weird question. Hey, Jen, tell us what we get wrong. How do we screw it up? How do we screw it up, Jen? Just go into me on air. Just attack me on air.
And she doesn't even give him the credit of giving him any advice.
She doesn't. She doesn't even do it. She doesn't even do it at the end. She's like, I'll leave your criticism up to you.
He's genuinely confused about what his job is supposed to be. And so he's talking. I don't know, man.
How do you ask the press secretary? You're supposed to be holding Washington accountable. Your job as Stetler, whatever his name is, Stelter, is supposed to be holding Psaki and this administration accountable. And your response is, hey, Jen, what do we get wrong? How do we fail miserably at this task, at this job? Please tell me.
And I
don't know. I'm
there's
unclear.
Something in the role that he's supposed to play is something like the role of a criminal interrogator.
Yes.
I'm not saying quite that heavy, but like, you're supposed to be a little bit adversarial, at least a bit adversarial. You're supposed to have a fundamental suspicion that the other side might be withholding something from you. And therefore, you're supposed to ask hard-hitting questions in order to figure out what that thing is. And even if it doesn't need to be that kind of paranoia.
Yeah.
You just need to come to them and know they might be wrong or they might be lying. They could be BSing me. I've got to be kind of critical here. And yet it would be like if you were the interrogator and you were like asking the criminal, am I doing a good job in your opinion? Do you think
am I interrogating you appropriately?
Is there any way that you'd want me to do this differently? Like, should I ask them the questions harder or softer? Which way do you like it?
How can I make this better for you?
Exactly. That's my point. That's my point. There's at least an element of that. And it's ridiculous. And then at the end, she goes and she blames Trump and talks about how when she's talking about trying to work on a bipartisan basis, how these last 4 years, which is itself a very interesting point if you think about it, we've been so caught up in this way of thinking about politics, which is namely criticizing Trump, that we've forgotten how politics works.
Actually works. Yeah.
which is to say that it doesn't. Nothing happens, which is why you got Trump in the first place. We have memories of goldfish and we speak to the world like Jen Psaki does with her,
That's a really good point. I missed that. That's a really good point. I mean, she's like, well, we got to remember what old politics used to be. You mean before Trump 4 years ago? Yes. We got to remember. It's different.
We got so caught up.
Yeah, we got so caught up. And it's like, but we weren't passing stuff under Trump and we weren't passing stuff like talking about even before years prior.
More of the same.
So
That's
you're
the
basically
thing.
saying everything, like you said, nothing worked. Nothing moved. Things basically were stuck. Yes. That's what politics was. That's what you guys need to be aware of. So when you're criticizing us for things being too slow or it's not getting anything done, just remember they weren't getting done anyway. That's wild when you think about that, because that's basically what you said. Look, things take forever anyway. Things take forever. You guys are criticizing us like we're supposed to get stuff done. Get your mind right. Get your mind right. It's like, yes, we're criticizing you because 600,000 human beings have died. And maybe that should have been the follow-up from Stelz. Meaning, I wouldn't have any issue with this question if it turns around and he just slams her behind it based on her answer, whatever the answer is. Because what is she going to say to that? How should you criticize us? And it's just it's a very weird question for him to ask. But I don't know. It's just a bizarre thing. He didn't go there at all. He was like legitimately, how should we talk to you? Like, it's very strange.
Yes, yeah.
And we have one more. And this is the pipeline CEO saying that the ransomware was the right choice. That feels weird to me.
But paying the ransomware.
Paying the ransomware, paying the ransom, basically paying the hostage takers. That was a correct choice. Let's play this clip. And tell me what you think about this. Do you think this is right, wrong, somewhere in between? Right, wrong doesn't necessarily apply. What do you think about the CEO basically paying off people who took the place hostage? Let's play a clip.
DarkSide demanded a financial payment in exchange for a key to unlock the impacted systems. We had cyber defenses in place, but the unfortunate reality is that those defenses were compromised. The attack forced us to make difficult choices in real time that no company ever wants to face. But I am proud of the way our people reacted quickly to isolate and contain the attack so that we could get the pipeline back up and running safely. We are deeply sorry for the impact that this attack had. I made the decision to pay, and I made the decision to keep the information about the payment as confidential as possible. It was the hardest decision I've made in my 39 years in the energy industry, and I know how critical our pipeline is to the country, and I put the interests of the country first. I kept the information closely held because we were concerned about operational safety and security, and we wanted to stay focused on getting the pipeline back up and running. I believe with all my heart it was the right choice to make. But I want to respect those who see this issue differently. I also now state publicly that we quietly and quickly worked with the law enforcement in this matter from the start, which may have helped lead to the substantial recovery of funds announced by the DOJ this week.
What did the FBI tell you?
What did they... Correct me if I'm wrong. That the reason that the pipeline was stopped had to do with them not being able to figure out who they were charging, not a physical obstruction or anything like that. And if I'm right about that, then this notion of I did the right choice, I just wanted to do what was best for America, et cetera, what that means is nothing. It didn't have to shut down. He just wouldn't have been able to charge the various people. These testimonies are just wild to me. What do you thought? A, should he have paid him off? B, is it really the best choice? Because if I'm right, you shut the pipeline down because of financing and charging issues, not because it was some kind of physical obstruction that was preventing you from getting energy to people who needed it. I mean, this testimony has problems. The hostage taking, let's go with that one first. Doesn't that incentivize hostage taking? Like, if you're paying this off, doesn't it incentivize more tax?
Oh, no, of course that does. Of course that incentivizes it. Of course it does. But at the same time, they got a lot of the money back. They got, what was it, $2.3 million that they were able to seize from that Bitcoin account, which, by the way, when that bit of information first came out, it was a little bit unclear if that was due to some fundamental insecurity in the platform Bitcoin, because they did this with a court order. It seems it was just stored sloppily. It seems like there was a private key, which is what you would need to access the funds, that was just stored slightly haphazardly or whatever, or half-heartedly. But nevertheless, since they got the money back, that was a success on their part.
Yeah.
They put the money in, they worked with the FBI, then they got at least most of it back. That's the assumption there. And therefore they carried on. I don't even blame them for shutting it down. Whatever, if they can't pay, if they can't figure out who's paying them. I think that is a valid concern of theirs. I'll be honest. I do. I kind of changed my mind on this one since we last talked about it. If they can't track payments, they're putting out a lot of money. They're a damn company. What they should have done is kept their system more secure in the first place, and probably not been such an existentially important company for providing gas, which is maybe an argument for, nationalizing our gas infrastructure, or or a case, there could be a case, of course, to be made that the government should figure out some serious penalty here for not having a secure enough system in the first place. But at the end of the day, they were able to disincentivize future ransomware hackers from wanting to do it, if for nothing else than the ransomware hackers lost a lot of the money that they made out of it. So it ended
That's
up being
interesting. Did they caught, or did they catch the people at the end of this?
No, they didn't catch it. They just got some of the money. Now, on the other hand, that group, I forget the name of the ransomware group that made the money here, they made a name for themselves, which is itself a kind of currency. They simply did this big hack, and it's,
they got paid for it.
That they got paid for it, but they also made a name for themselves for carrying this kind of thing off, which is itself enough incentive that I'm sad to say this isn't probably going to matter much.
Yes.
They're going to do it again. Other people are going to want to do this kind of thing again, because a lot of what, the roots of this culture is just people doing things to screw with authority, in this kind of rivalrous community where it's like, okay, well, I can do it. I can break into the NSA. Well, I can break into NASA. You know what I mean? Screw them all.
How much of this did they get? They didn't get all of it back. They got a certain percentage of it, like the overwhelming majority.
Yeah, and we got a caller on the line too.
Oh, okay, let's go to the caller. But I'm just going to say, even if they got $20,000, would that be worth it?
Yeah, that's where it starts to get a bit harder. But they got 2.3 million back, so I'm going to say that's worth it for them.
Fair enough.
We got David calling in from Kansas City. David, you are on the line. What is on your mind?
Hey, guys. First, I just want to say you guys are doing a great job. I think the show's really found a good rhythm. Shane, hope you're feeling well.
Thank you.
No, if you are like me, but yesterday I was screaming at the radio when the Kamala Harris clip was playing from her at the border. And so next to the Brian as well of what are you getting wrong about coverage of the Biden administration? Wall-to-wall coverage of the xenophobic, racist policy by the Biden-Harris administration would be one thing that they could improve upon if they want to be consistent with how they covered Trump on it. So I hate the whataboutism. I think it's a defeatist mentality that rightfully the right and the conservative movement has to figure out their way around. You can't just point to, hey, this isn't fair. Look at how you cover them versus us. They have to figure out a more positive proposition and position to sell to their people. But man, I was Jamarl. You were heated over it too, possibly over a different perspective. But the inconsistency in that is one thing that I think Stelter and the rest of his crew could improve upon. I'll listen offline.
Excellent. I like that. The inconsistency associated with the way that they go about their news and media. I mean, Hunter Biden story, great example of that. I mean, just in general. So, no, man, thank you. I appreciate the call. Great call. And yeah, he's right. I was annoyed by the video greatly. I mean, I get annoyed about it less. So the hypocrisy is something that it takes you a bit to get used to. So is that part. But it's the way at which they ignore the real reasons that the South has problems. And they explicitly disassociate themselves from it. Like it's like they paint themselves out of the picture. Or you just see this kind of white blob of a background where there was a person there, and then we just act as if that person was never there.
And that's the thing. But Kamala's not going to actually solve everything. And
She's never going to solve it. She's never even going to touch it.
It's in its own way. It's a segment. We're going slightly over time. This is a segment to our next guest. We're coming back on. We're going to be talking with Camila Escalante about the Peruvian election results, but the heavy-handed American diplomacy. If Kamala Harris were to come out and say, guys, there's this thing called the Monroe Doctrine. Some of you have probably heard of. Basically, it was this heavy-handed, paternalistic approach to Central and South America, adopted by the United States. As it was really, on the upswing in international affairs, and as it wanted to create its sort of own sphere of influence, its own pillar of influence almost, hemispherically, in North, Central, and South America. But the times have changed. Our role in the world has changed. And we have decided that we have done some harm in terms of our relationships with these countries. And in order to benefit not just the American people, but also the peoples of the beautiful countries of Central and South America and the Caribbean, we've decided, alongside the State Department, that we're going to systematically change on a deep level our investments, our involvements, and our roles in the administrations of all these different countries.
New world.
In a new world, it could be a new era, but you'd have to actually look in the mirror and say what you see. And we do not want to do that. We don't have leaders with either enough power or enough guts to get away with doing that, I'm sad to say. So Kamala Harris has to do this whole theatrical business. Anyway, we're going into a break, coming back with Camila Escalante. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So elections are afoot. We have the elections going on in Peru. Keiko Fujimori, one of the two candidates, and she is running against Pedro Castillo. This has been a highly watched race, and this race has been extremely close. Right now, we have a situation with the popular force, 49.6%, Keiko, and Pedro Castillo with 50.4%. Now, Pedro is the lefty in this contest, and so far, let me see right here, leftist teacher, Pedro Castillo. Now, the thing is, the lead is beginning to widen, but slightly, and it's still razor thin, and at this point, people are still paying attention to this election. This has been upped a bit with Keiko invoking election fraud. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Camila Escalante. Camila Escalante is, there we are, I apologize. Camila Escalante is a TV news producer and presenter at Telesur English who also works for Kashwan News. Camila, thank you for joining me.
Thank you guys for having me again today.
Absolutely. So the elections are in Peru. So what is taking place currently on the ground in these elections, and who are these candidates? So who is Pedro Castillo, and who is Keiko Fujimori?
Pedro Castillo is a teacher, and he comes from a rural region of Peru, one of the poorest regions of the country. And he has roots in this kind of rural world, much like we can make several parallels with Evo Morales in Bolivia. And he kind of was a head leading figure of a national teacher strike a few years ago. And he was able to build a strong alliance among farmers, teachers, unions, and, even towards the end, these leftist progressives that represented more of, the feminist and LGBT movement, they lent support to him. And on the other hand, we have the daughter of the dictator Alberto Fujimori in the 90s, and she became Keiko Fujimori herself became known as the first lady of the dictatorship to her father. And this is her third time running for the presidency, and her third time losing, of course. And 5 years ago, in 2016, when she lost to Pablo Kuczynski, it was even by a smaller margin, if you can believe it. So she's someone who's been able to unify the entire Peruvian establishment this time around. And so she, has the backing of all the big corporations and the media.
And okay, so I want to focus on Keiko Fujimori here for a second, because she is an interesting figure, as is Alberto Fujimori. She was first lady of Peru for a time, and normally when you're aware of a first lady, you would assume they're the wife of the president or the head of state. She was the daughter, and she was declared first lady because her mother, who was the first lady, was stripped of that title after she accused Alberto Fujimori of kidnapping and torture and corruption. That is, again, a wife accusing her husband, and this is a scandal, and not just a scandal, but, as many assume it to be true, a serious blight in Peruvian democracy and in the Peruvian government, what Alberto Fujimori did. And that is sort of what Keiko Fujimori comes out of. What specifically is Alberto Fujimori known for, Camila? And how has his reputation and his legacy affected his daughter as she runs, apparently successfully, to head the country that he once headed, Camila?
Well, he's known for, I guess, first and foremost, the things that people have been able to come out and say during this campaign and use against him, use against her, has been the forced sterilizations of Indigenous women, where they thought that they were going in to receive vaccination or, whatever else, but it turned out to be forced sterilization that actually took place in Bolivia as well. But he also, some other issues that people didn't really talk about is the kind of a mix between these leftist guerrilla factions and what some people would call, terrorism. These are different groups, of course. It's not just one group. And, some of this went on television, international television. There was one incident where there was a massive shootout at the Japanese embassy in Lima, and we saw all of the guerrillas executed. And the hostages that they had taken in order to demand the release of political prisoners had been released. Really dramatic events that happened there. But I think, a lot of what some people remember, but were unable to kind of bring up in this election period was, a lot of other state killings that went on. And the reason why people were unable to kind of talk about it was because of this very strong media campaign against the left that accuses leftists of any kind by association of being a terrorist or being aligned with terrorism or friends with the Shining Path and stuff like this. And this has been very difficult because in order to run a successful campaign in Latin America, a lot of campaigns and candidates have felt that they've had to distance themselves from these sorts of events that are very, complicated. And so, this has resulted in Pedro Castillo kind of distancing himself from even other leftist forces in the region and whatnot.
So he grew up defending against the Shining Path, basically. Isn't that right? Where he's known, even though he's aligned with the left, clearly, he also says that he grew up defending against Shining Path, the leftist organization out of Peru, right?
Yeah, I don't actually know what his position on that has been. It seems pretty obvious that he's in kind of a different world where,
he lives in a rural area. And so he grew up as a patrolman for the Ronda Campesina. And it's said that he defended against the Shining Path effectively, which is just interesting because, again, he's a leftist candidate who, if they've been successfully portrayed, and I don't know the details of the truth of the matter because it's, we should get into it more, specifically what the Shining Path has done and is accused of doing historically. I know a bit, and it's extremely controversial. They are known, internationally as a terrorist organization, but it'd be good to go over the specifics. Anyway, that he had to succeed in politics in Peru by basically saying, and having been somebody apparently who patrolled against them. It's just interesting. I was just commenting on that because, it's something I read about him, Pedro Castillo. Anyway, Camilla.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, obviously, just in the case of, any area that has armed groups, irregular groups, people who live in these rural regions, in order to exist, they have to find a way to coincide just for their own safety and for other matters. I mean, we have people who are charging tolls on the highways and things like this. So you really have no option but to, learn to coincide with these people. So I guess going back to Fujimori, of course, this is someone who's extremely old. He must be like 80 right now, and he's in prison. And so obviously one of her aims, Keiko Fujimori, is to get her father out of prison so he's not going to die there. But inevitably now under Castillo's presidency, there'll be no way for him to be released. And so a lot has been at stake for her personally in this
what seems like a
presidential election run.
Yeah.
And for herself as well, because there are charges against her and with very convincing thousands of pages of evidence. And this is something that hasn't been spoken about in the media on the large Peruvian national networks. They haven't even brought up the fact that she is, seen as a criminal and someone who is sure to be convicted now.
Wait, right. Okay. So the presidency was going to be the thing that basically kept her out of jail or also get her dad out of jail. I'm curious, what is going to be the effect of this election going forward? I mean, and from the way that Peru is seeing this, I mean, this was a very close election. I mean, seems like she's going to lose, but it's going to be a close loss. So what happens going forward in Peru? And for that matter, what were the main issues that were on the election block that they were fighting over for this election?
So she's supposed to be obviously the candidate of continuity, protecting the neoliberal project, protecting the system in which Peru has had some, Pedro Castillo's whole slogan has been no more poor people or no poverty in a rich country, because, Peru is able to have some amount of, increase in GDP, but none of it has really trickled down to the people. And so in terms of economic policy, after decades of growth with no redistribution, Castillo has promised to move forward with a new economic model characterized by a more active role of the state. So that's going to be really important. He has previously, before the first round, talked about nationalizations in the way that Evo Morales has in Peru, but I think he's had to scale back a little bit of that rhetoric because some people have attacked him, saying he's going to go after private businesses and he's just going to nationalize everything and, make it into a communist state. So he's had to kind of be careful with the things he said in that regard, but he's also proposed a constituent assembly in order to write a new constitution. That was central, but a lot of other, a lot of other important progressive or leftist takes.
Camilla, we're going to have to end this here. Thank you for joining us. Camilla Escalante is a TV news producer and presenter at Telesur English, who also works for Keshwan News. You can follow her on Twitter at Camilla Press. Follow her channel all the time. She's awesome. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, events, philosophy, tech, and a lot more from across these divided states and the surface of our increasingly disunited globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning again, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Hope your morning has gone well, continues to go well. If you're just joining us, hope your morning is beautiful and the sky outside is clear and lovely. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there are about 15,000 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about 370 new deaths over the past week. That, along with many other days, has left us with an average of about 14,031 cases per day. That's a decrease of 42% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 42% of the American public, meanwhile, has been fully vaccinated, and 52% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,398,000 people across the U.S. and killed about 598,000 people. For the first time since last year, cafes and restaurants in France are now once again allowed to serve customers indoors. I'm sure many are excited about that. In national news, the Senate passed the Endless Frontier Act yesterday. That's an industrial policy bill aimed at increasing research into investment opportunities for the United States. It's also cast as a part of our competition with China. We'll be coming back to that in international headlines. The White House yesterday announced a plan to use the Defense Production Act to mass produce medical goods that are in short supply in the United States. This announcement follows a 100-day review of the country's supply chain, undertaken following the passage of an executive order signed this February to test the admin with inspecting 4 areas of the American economy. Those are pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, large capacity batteries, and rare and critical minerals. Washington State is incentivizing vaccines with marijuana. Their program, Joints for Jabs, I'll say that again, Joints for Jabs, and this is real news, gives out a free joint to anyone who gets the vaccine. That might be why the state has already hit 70% vaccinated and are pushing, of course, for 100%. In international news, Beijing hit back at the Senate's passage of the Endless Frontier Act. That's an industrial plan previously mentioned in these headlines, just passed by the Senate, often cast as a way to accelerate American innovation in its competition with China. The Foreign Affairs Committee of the National People's Congress of China said of the language in the bill that it is, quote, full of Cold War thinking and ideological prejudice, end quote, also saying that the bill, quote, attempts to exaggerate the so-called China threat to maintain the U.S.'s global hegemony, interfere in China's internal affairs under the pretext of human rights and religion, and deprive China's right to develop through technology and economic decoupling, end quote. In Afghanistan, at least 10 people involved in mining clearance operations have been shot dead, with local officials blaming the Taliban, which has nevertheless denied its involvement. Judges in Moscow meeting today could label Alexei Navalny's organizations as extremist, which would involve some serious repercussions, including many of them shuttering, as some of them have already done, effectively shutting down operations while this sort of probe, this decision, looms. In Syria, Israeli airstrikes on the city of Damascus are said to have caused the deaths of about 5 government soldiers and 3 allied soldiers. That's according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a one-man outfit based in the UK that says it uses a few hundred anonymous sources in Syria and has no oversight from outside parties, but which nevertheless has a catchy name and gets a lot of media publicity for its claims over the course of years. In tech news, El Salvador, the country, has adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. That makes it the first country in the world to do so, making the cryptocurrency an official currency, which visitors can use to make purchases from businesses. Residents can do that. They can also use it to pay their taxes, too. The IMF, that's the International Monetary Fund, meanwhile, has discussed this move critically. They've wondered publicly how this move could affect the body's lending to El Salvador. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, the part of what's interesting to me about this, we're casting the industrial. I'm coming back to the industrial bill, the Endless Frontier Act. Exactly, which is a cool name. As far as names go, I like that one, actually. I haven't
John Wayne, that's what it puts me in mind of. John Wayne walking out the house, and
I'm
there's a huge
so
frontier.
surprised it does not put you in mind of Star Trek, Jamarl. If there's
Oh,
one
the
thing
Endless
that would-
Frontier, no. Because it put me in mind of this, yeah, I don't know why. It for my head, it was the John Wayne thing. It's this, I know what it is. There was an analysis of this notion of, like, not being modernity and this inability for the individual to get modernity. Like John Wayne could never stay in the house. John Wayne always walked out and continued onto the frontier because there was always more frontier.
It's and that's a psychological outgrowth, arguably, of the whole manifest destiny thing. And you know,
Yeah.
you do have this apparently endless frontier, at least until the Pacific coast.
That was where my head was. It was more into terrestrial models. No, I wasn't thinking of space. I was thinking of this notion of we, based on our own ideological framing of the world, all of the stuff is for us to expand upon.
Yeah.
And if you can make an argument that we can expand to the borders of California, why not pass the borders of California?
Why not exactly. Why not to Hawaii? Which of course
why not to Hawaii?
We did.
Why not to
the Philippines? Which of course we did. And why not China? Why not China?
You can just keep going, right?
Yes.
And then you just leave the planet and just keep going from there.
Yeah.
Like the manifest destiny thing is a funny and interesting argument. Basically, you can go as far as your military capacity can take you. At which point, you stop when you can't go any further.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. Look, like I said, I don't hate the premise of the bill.
Well, but here's where I was going with it. Endless Frontier. I like the name, but the thing is, there's the whole, and I was reminded of this by one of the articles I was reading about this. There's the Made in China 2025 strategic plan on the part of China, which, granted, that's separate idea, separate name, but also focused on industrial and technological development, which is the thing that I would argue we associate with China at this point. My point is, in some ways, we're not just competing China, we're imitating them, we're aping them, we're doing the same thing they did, which is a little bit more steered market economy, or pardon me, a little bit more steered planned economy stuff, and a little bit less market economy, where everything is sort of laissez-faire and you let people work it out. Whatever industries boom, they boom, even though that's been a myth for longer than we've been saying it with all of our subsidies to agriculture and everything, where there's so much that we do direct. But anyway, my point is, it's interesting that we're imitating them at the same time as we're competing with them, which is both inevitable. That's the kind of thing you do with your competitors, and funny because we cast ourselves as being so different from them in all these different ways.
Yeah, I mean, you end up looking a lot like your enemies after a while. I mean, after all, what weapons are you using?
Yeah.
There's this great thing. What is it? Assassin's Creed. where he's like, everything, remember, nothing is true, everything is permitted, and everything else. And there's some people who hate that. It's like, what do you mean everything is permitted? What do you mean nothing is true?
Assassin's Creed. This is like, isn't that like based on the credo of the assassins? I've played these video games, Jamarl. Doesn't this have to do with the Knights Templar? Are you quoting the Knights Templar?
It's Assassin's Creed, the video game, and the movie. Well, at a certain point, they're asking this question like, well, what makes them different than the bad guys? Like, the bad guys are trying to get control. The bad guys kill at a whim. They kill at a whim. In fact, they go so far as to say everything is permitted. So it's like the only thing that matters, basically, or that makes me different from you is I have a different point of view of the world.
I'm wearing another colored armband.
And another colored armband. Now, you could say, well, there is a difference between this notion of freedom versus domination and control and that type of stuff in the ways that they fight. But the weapons, same.
Yeah.
Tools are the same. The things that are permitted are the same.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you get this kind of similarities regarding your opponents.
Yeah.
It's like the mirror.
And what's also interesting, too, is that what does China remind me of? I'll put it like this. If there were an era of American growth that modern China reminded me of most, what would that be? What decade would it be in? It would probably be like the 40s or 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
In the post-war era, when we had that kind of technologically optimistic mindset and we were expanding and
every other country was on fire.
Dominant. Yeah. And socially conservative, and the government was a bit overreaching, and there were widespread fears that the government itself was going fascist, even though it had just beat off the fascists, all that.
But if you think about it,
that same era.
We are a sandbox, all of it. The states oftentimes are called these like little experiments, these little labs. And it's like if something goes well in a state, well, then other states can appropriate the behavior, and maybe the entire country can.
But who's running the experiments?
Well, each state is their own experiment of sorts.
So there's no coordinator.
There's
for
no
these
coordinator.
Experiments.
It's just random balls. Somebody hits I mean, that's what it is, right? It's like my argument for this whole thing of even us supporting various members in our society and everything else for school. I make the assumption that the overwhelming majority are going to be duds. That we are going to be putting money out, and they're going to be most of the people who go, and they're going to be duds. They're going to get philosophy majors. They're going to be English majors. They're going to be all this other stuff. However, you will get a percentage that will not be duds. And that percentage is going to be the benefit of the totality of the entirety of the process, right? I think that's the way we do with states. I think that's the way we do with countries. And so you see a country that does well. The other country says, hey, that country is doing well by doing this. And
let's copy them.
You're going to copy them.
You're going to copy them.
You're competing with them. You're trying to do better. You're trying to edge out. That's what you do. When you see the muscle builders, and these stretching and everything else, and you would see one guy walk over to get close to one of the bigger guys so he can look, in comparison to the guy.
Well, totally.
It's the same process. I don't think it's any dramatically different.
Totally. And that is inevitable. But the other side of that is also inevitable too. What comes with, what allows the one country that's like doing the thing to actually beat out all the competitors, to be the one that's successful? It has to do something fundamentally new. And if we get too busy, if we get too into the mindset of looking at what everybody else is doing and the marginal advantages they've gained, and what marginal advantage we could gain if we imitated them, if we get into this mindset where we are eternally looking outside of ourselves for like a locus of our actions, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If we're just imitating people, then you don't do the innovation that fundamentally you need to do if you want to dominate, to use the word that you sometimes do when we're talking politics. If you want to truly win, you need to do new stuff, which means not competing with other people, not getting into the mindset of competing with other people. It means doing something new.
The rub, Shay.
And therein lies the rub, which is when you're competing, well, there's risk there. And when you're competing with other people, you're looking at what they're already doing. In a weird way, it's self-defeating. You do not want to get too into the mindset of competition, because the more you do that, the more you desire the same things they do, the more you are going to do things in the same way they do. Frankly, competition at its root always has to do with people wanting the same thing.
Same thing, yeah.
Exactly. And the more you want the same thing, the more you become like the other person, the more on a sort of identity level you identify with the other person.
Until you transcend.
Hopefully,
I mean, because
what
I think typically happens is people says, okay, that guy's doing that very well. Mayweather, amazing boxer. Okay, how does he do it? What does he do? You study that guy. Yeah. You study those games. You figure out, okay, how does he do that? What are the mechanics of that? And you try on some level, because everybody starts from somewhere, to get close to whatever that person is, whatever that thing is, and what they're doing. At some point, though, you are going to start appropriating ideas of your own. Like, hey, maybe this is the way to do it.
This would be better.
Yeah, how can this be better?
Yeah.
And those things might be incremental at some point. But you also may have this kind of just radical new look at the way it's being done
And I would argue that the mindsets are different, that those two things require, and I'm using the word mindset.
You mean to change over into something else?
Yeah, they require,
mindset,
they require the thoughts you're thinking and the way that you see things, the metaphors you're using, all this stuff.
Paradigm shift.
Radically different. There has to be a paradigm shift. And you can switch back and forth between these modes, but I guess I'm worried that what's weird, we're talking specifically about the industrial plan, the Endless Frontier Act that the Senate just passed, and that is being cast, again, we've talked about this in our headlines repeatedly this morning, as part of our competition with China. In a weird way, China, I think, competed with us, copied us, and now we're copying them. And what you're left with is a simulacrum of a simulacrum, or a copy of a copy. It's airsats, to use a slightly fancy word. And what we need to do is, if we want to actually advance our frontier, we need to do new stuff. We need to come up with our own new ideas. And I don't think it's going to look like any recognizable ideology. We were so mired in the past. At least on the governmental level, there are a lot of people with like cool, interesting ideas that are competing in the underbelly of culture, like on Twitter and all these weird places that have become the new public squares. There are plenty of thinkers. It's just the government, you know.
Well, it's not just government. I mean, the government is just the aggregation of human beings in regards to trying to find some kind of popular.
No, it's not.
Mainstream.
That's getting philosophical about it. No, that's
not getting philosophical about
government
it.
Government is a group of elites who managed to grab power and
You could say that, but those were human beings, people, even with the context of them being elites.
Yeah, but there's
still just people.
There's no magic linkage between what they want and what we want. They're not representatives of us. This is the lie that we've convinced ourselves.
I don't
we've
know
deluded ourselves.
I mean, they're still people.
There's
There's a there to it.
They're not they're not like arbiters of the statistical average of other people.
No,
they're people.
I don't think they're I don't think they're that. I think that people are people though. And I do think, for the most part, that whether they are elites or anything else, they're still human beings, and those human beings have certain things that tether them to us. But it's not that I think that they go in the government and say, we're going to do the best thing for America. I don't think that.
No, because here's the thing. Are Republicans and Democrats as parties representative of Americans as people? No.
20% would say they are.
Yeah, and that by definition is a minority. That's
20% of Democrats, 30% or 20% of Republicans would say we think this is representative in regards to parties and everything else.
I doubt those numbers, but even then, that's
and by the way,
20% of all Americans.
It doesn't need to be representative. You can disagree with everything that they say. It's the mainstream of thought and conversation. Meaning, you can hate the government. You can say, "I'm going to stay in a bucket," but the government can send a cop to go get you and drag you to jail. Meaning, you can't ignore.
Yeah, but we distrust it. We distrust the use of force by government simply because I think that most of us don't feel like the government actually represents us.
You can distrust it, but you still have to pay attention to it and acknowledge it. It's the mainstream of thought.
Yeah, but those are the elites. The mainstream.
It's even the conversation.
The mainstream of thought at this point is that they don't represent us.
That's fine, Shane, but you still are stuck with the notion that when things are being talked about in Congress or in media and everything else, it consists of the mainstream of thought. They don't have to be right. It doesn't have to be honest. It doesn't even have to be truthful.
I'm not even sure there is one, though.
I think there is. I think there is a thing that people organize around in regards to what a majority or large number of people, not majority, a large number of people in the public would notice and understand as basically news and the things that they're being bannered.
I think that's the elites. I think the elites have their mainstream of thought. The elites have their bubble. I think that there are too many different too many different publics at this point. I think that the internet genuinely did fracture this big old monocultural system that we've gotten used to. And despite all attempts to reinforce an orthodoxy, to reimpose or just simply get people on the same page again, this is what we think, this is who we are, this is how we do things, etc. Things have split up irreparably. They're going to be that way. The elites, by definition, are elites. They're sort of a more or less consistent and homogeneous class. And so they have their power. They have their way of seeing things. They have their ideas about what the public thinks. And that's what they're responding to. They're responding to their own copy of a copy of a copy. And that's what's sad, is that ultimately we're not driving the process. There is no way that the process can be driven by a public, because there is no such thing as a public anymore. There are only competing subcultures.
You must understand, an iterative process is one of the most powerful elements in logic creation, right? I build something, and I have that thing iterate and build something else on top of it, and just do it eternally, infinitely. And you could say it's a copy of a copy, but that copy is getting better. That copy is improving. That copy, in fact, it's not even a copy anymore. It's something different. It's something new. It's something that's manifested that had came from whatever that thing was that was in the beginning as those changes were being made.
Sometimes it gets stronger, and sometimes it gets weaker.
Sometimes
Evolution,
it dies. Sometimes,
exactly.
But the point is, the fact that you have a lot of them, the ones that die off, you don't care about.
I'm
it's
a little
the
bit
ones
worried.
that get stronger and the ones that perpetuate your society forward.
In a weird way, I'm worried that we don't have a lot of them. In a weird way, I'm worried that our civilization...
A lot of what? the ones that are
a
stronger?
lot of different experiments. I think things are so tied together, and that's the other side of globalism. If
you
you were
just argued about the internet fracturing the public
that's
and all
culture.
of these different ideas.
But if we're
and everything
talking,
else.
that's culture, because we're talking ideas. We're talking about who thinks what about government or
Yeah, yeah,
society, or what views are being represented. But if you're talking about civilization as a whole, we are so technologically integrated on a global scale, despite the cultural disruption, that if one of the dominoes falls, if it's a big enough domino, at a certain point, it hits a lot of other dominoes. We're also, that's my point.
If that's true, then there is a public, because that means that there is a center of organization and interests that overlap a large body of human beings on the planet. If something happens around the world and the UN is covering it, or let's say America's covering it, when Khashoggi got killed but basically butchered, it was world news.
Totally.
That's a public.
Totally.
Like, that's what I mean. Like, there is this kind of, you might have all these fractures and everything else, but at the end of the day, there's a stream that people kind of lump into when they're trying to figure out, okay, what is the thing that's being talked about? I think that is what I'm considering to be public in regards to this, the thing. Does it make sense? It doesn't need to be something that you agree with. It just needs to be something that you and everybody else responds to. There's a difference in those things. You can disagree with government. You can think they're lying to you and everything else, but you're going to be responding to it. It's nothing that you could just ignore. The cop is going to knock on your door. And when people are looking for information and data and stuff like that, wherever they are in their sandbox, they tend to go to the stream at some point to try to figure out what's at the very least being talked about.
Totally, but the stream that they're paying attention to is sort of built to suit them. It's built on lies. We need to close.
Yeah.
But it's just weird ironies, weird contradictions in these things. Anyway, morning talk show, folks. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side with Mark Frost. Be right back when we come back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you're digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So ProPublica has basically done, I guess you could say, a deep dive into the uber wealthy and the amount of taxes that the uber wealthy pays in comparison to the rest of us. And I'll just read this part. ProPublica has obtained a vast trove of internal revenue data on tax returns of thousands of the nation's wealthiest people covering more than 15 years. The data provides an unprecedented look inside the financial lives of the American titans, including Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Rupert Murdoch, Mark Zuckerberg. It shows not just their income taxes, but also their investments, stock trades, etc. The wild part is they're basically making the point of saying that these guys basically just pay a fraction of their wealth, despite the fact that their fortunes are growing each year. I mean, think about Bezos, for example, and think about the money that Bezos made over the course of the time of COVID. Well, how much of that is he going to pay in taxes and federal taxes? And how would you feel if you find out that he paid zero? We're joined with Mark Frost. Mark Frost is an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schumpeterian, recovering libertarian. And of course, you can follow Mark on Twitter at Frosty Cash. Mark, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I think this is going to be your economist hat more than anything else for today, because I'm more curious about your take on this, especially given your political bearing, or at the very least recovering political bearing, paying no taxes. That somebody like Bezos could basically pay zero in federal taxes. And right here, it says they were talking about this thing where they're trying to call the true tax rate. And they were looking, I'll just read it right here. In 2007, Jeff Bezos, then a multi-billionaire and now it's richest man, did not pay a penny in federal income taxes. He achieved that feat again in 2011. In 2018, Tesla's founder, Elon Musk, second richest man in the world, also paid zero federal income taxes. Bloomberg managed to do the same thing in recent years. Billionaire investor Carl Icahn did it twice. Soros paid no income taxes in 3 years in a row. They're basically making a point that says these guys have the wealth where they can use all sorts of gimmicks and legal maneuvering to basically avoid paying taxes and do something in a way that the most people can't. It also goes into this thing we're just calling its effective tax rate. And it's trying to say, okay, well, yeah, we get that these people are paying a flat amount as a high amount, but what is that in percentage of their income, or for that matter, percentage of their income over the point of a given year? What's your take on this, just in general, in regards to the way these taxes are appropriated? And for that matter, many people, billionaires, skating without paying any.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I really think ProPublica did a great job here. Just what I liked even more than the article was their article of, I think it was this morning or last night, where they said why we are publishing the tax secrets. I agree with that essay 100%. A society like ours can only function if there's at least large degrees of transparency. And I like the way that they peeled the onion back, because they do open up some very interesting questions that are not new. As you know, history kind of repeats itself. And if you go back to the days of, the late 19th century, you had a big recession and you had the progressive movement coming in. You had Henry George, who said, why are we taxing income? We should be taxing wealth. And he proposed a single tax, get rid of all taxes and just tax rents, that is land and things that are gifts of nature, and that will fund government, that sort of a thing. But after reading this ProPublica article, I thought of a great Joseph Schumpeter quote that just came to me immediately. And the quote is, the true pacemakers of socialism were not the Marxists and social agitators who preached it, but the Rockefellers, Mellons, and Carnegies. And he was correct in that, because what he argued was that capitalism requires an element of faith. The general person on the street may never end up being Jeff Bezos, but he has to have this romantic feeling that he could be, that it's possible for him to have done that. And as technology and just society evolves, and we see how the tax code is actually written, that it's stacked in favor of the people who already have money, we can see what's going on. And it's not necessarily just the billionaires. I dated a woman once who was not very bright. She had almost zero productivity, but she made $13,000 a month from the mineral rights on property that she inherited. It was in Texas, and there was functioning oil wells on it.
She didn't need brights at that point.
She still makes that money. She'll always make that money because, so she didn't do anything for society. She didn't invent anything. She didn't work. She didn't go do anything other than she had the good fortune of being born to a particular set of parents that owned some land, and oil was found on that land, and the economic rents, as we economists call them, gifts of nature, was transferred to her, just as part of a property rights type thing. This is what drove Henry George crazy on that sort of a thing. Now, getting to the article itself, wealth is a much trickier thing to calculate than income. Right. Income is fairly explicit. It's kind of fairly easy to know what income is because you can trace it through a person's bank accounts. How much cash how has your cash position changed? So if you're a normal person and you have a job and you have direct deposit, I can audit your bank account and tell you pretty much all of your financial situation. I can tell what your bills are. I can tell what your income is, that sort of a thing. Wealth is a different story. And, there are famous billionaires like Warren Buffett who he certainly lives well, but he doesn't live as well as he could. And if he was here, he would say, well, yeah, folks, but I've never actually, you know, I'm a high compounder, and it's better for me to not pay a lot of taxes, and I can accumulate all this wealth, and then I can give it away.
Which is what his plan is. And he, Bill Gates, you know, they're sort of representing themselves as modern philanthropists, and they plan to do that work where they make a bunch of money, then they give the vast majority of it away at the end of their lives. And I was talking about this with Jamarl. We had the conversation about this briefly earlier, and his comeback was basically, okay, but at the end of their lives, they've had that money for so long. They've been building that up over the course of their lives. Look at all the problems that you know, take place and are underway. And I hear that argument, but there's also the deeper argument. If I put, I guess, a slightly more right-leaning hat on, whatever, isn't that their right? If I want to raise stupid, spoiled kids, or if I want to raise kids, it's not even that they're going to be stupid and spoiled. I want to give them the ability, all of the opportunities. I want to educate them. This is my future. This is the future of our planet. And I believe as a parent, and I'm speaking again in the eyes of somebody, in the mind of somebody else, I want to give them the best chance and the world the best chance by giving them all these opportunities, all this education, and making them a person who can use it capably. You know, the spoiled parent is the sort of easy take. That's included under the locus of free rights. And at the same time, if I want to take a huge risk, and whether I inherit money or I just do it bootstrapping, if I want to take a huge risk, spend years of my life developing a new business that fundamentally revolutionizes something about how people live, either makes something cheaper for them or makes it possible for them to do something they couldn't, why is it that as soon as I suddenly succeed, other people have the right to come in and say, okay, well, that's my pie too? And it's not just that it's hard to measure, it's that it's ideologically, or as a human being, should we even be trying to expropriate this stuff? As soon as people get successful, quote unquote, say they do it without relying on or abusing labor, either in an abstract sense or directly, say they do this entirely on their own, coding up their own software, what right do we have to take, just because it's good for us, the thing that they've created with their own blood, sweat, and tears? Mark, what's your take on this?
Well, I think the argument would be that we don't live in islands, that in a state of anarchy, the Gates and the Bezoses and the Buffetts of the world would make nothing. There would be no property rights. There would be no police power being exerted collectively by the people to maintain a particular system. So when you talk about rights, I'm a big believer in redistributive capitalism. Let the people that are good compounders go and create wealth, and then let politicians and the political will, within constitutional constraints, spend that money collectively where it needs to be spent. Because if you're a capitalist, you have to believe in property rights. If you believe in property rights, you have to believe in police power. If you believe in police power, you have to believe that there are some things that individuals are not entitled by right to do.
But specifically with a wealth tax, I know there is a debate about this, but use the caveat, you know, with protection from the Constitution. I'm paraphrasing you slightly. There's a debate about constitutionally whether wealth taxes have historically been implemented, have been allowed, should be allowed, et cetera. I get that that's up in the air. But my point is, this is still a question. Have we skirted the Constitution? And if you assume for a second that we did, isn't that what you're talking about, Mark?
No, I don't think so. My understanding of the tax of the constitutionality of tax is the Supreme Court has declared that what was it, the 18th Amendment? Yeah, it was the 18th Amendment that added the tax code. So, right? Was it the 18th or the 16th? Whatever. The amendment that allowed the taxation of incomes without proportional reapportionment to the states. So the Supreme Court has declared that amendment to the Constitution gave no new taxing authority to the federal government.
But even that, if you look it up, the 16th Amendment was the one you were talking about, and I had to look it up, so no slight against you. That was applying to income tax, not against wealth taxes. And we didn't intend to get. We were maintaining it on the level of sort of philosophy, so I didn't want to get into the constitutional specifics here too much. But
well, yeah, sure. I mean, if you think about it philosophically, especially in this modern day of derivatives And one of the things that the article pointed out I thought was very good that very few people think about is the concept of billionaires wanting to be in debt when they die. Back in a former life in the late 80s, I was the Equitable's second highest grossing life insurance agent. You know how I sold so much life insurance? It wasn't for the death benefit. It was so people would put millions of dollars in these life insurance policies and take loans out against them later in life. And as long as they left enough money in there so that the dividends paid for the actual actuarial part of the death benefit, the policy would not lapse. And the IRS, because it was a loan against their policy, did not call that income. So I like the way the article pointed out that there is a class of people that the tax code protects more than the common person.
Yes.
And the average Joe, a person that is a person making $40,000 a year, pays a high rate of income tax when you count all of the payroll taxes that is taken out of them.
And that's where we can ultimately agree. I was kind of putting stuff up as devil's advocate there, and there are elements of that I think need to be said and heard, and that I totally agree with. But at the same time, at the end of the day, if one class of people is getting taxed more than the other, and if the group that's getting taxed is most of us, if it's the people who don't have power, who lack power, who, by lack of competence or lack of opportunity, haven't been able to build up capital for themselves, the fact that they're getting hit harder, that does seem wrong. And that's where I think at the end of the day, we agree completely. Mark, it's simply relative. That's not right. Mark, I think we need to close here. Thank you for the great conversation, as always. Mark Frost.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And for those listening, that was Mark Frost, economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Schumpeterian, recovering libertarian, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming back on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What do we want? News, politics, and culture. When do we want it? Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We've just had a good conversation with Mark Frost. I've always enjoyed Frost. He has a great way of thinking. But going into a new conversation, we've had this guest on before, and I've always been interested in having this, the way this guest thinks, especially about the military policy and foreign policy. Danny Surgeon.
We're still trying to bring him on.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. I apologize.
It has been a long time. It's been a long time since we've spoken with Danny. He's been hard at work on a new book we want to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. He has a new book called A True History of the United States. Now, this puts me in mind of Howard Zinn's A People History of the United States. Zinn was one of those people who shaped my workable point of view of the world. His lectures are phenomenal. This notion of a good war. Have you ever heard Zinn take the devil's advocate position against, like, good wars?
Against Obama.
No. He's not being lazy about it. He's actually challenging the hardest of wars, the Revolutionary War, the Second World War.
World War II, exactly.
Yeah, it's like these are the wars that are lionized in this culture, and those are the ones that needs to be challenged. And he gives this really fascinating lecture about the difference between a good reason versus a good war. Like, something can happen around the world that is horrible, and he's like, oh, that's horrible.
Yeah.
But we have this real quirk in this country where it's like it immediately necessitates a good war. Like, hey, we have a good reason to go bomb stuff down. Let's do it. As opposed to, it's like, well, yeah, I get that that's bad, but does that necessarily mean that you need to immediately go and bomb it? What gives you the justification and right for it? And him disambiguating those things in this really interesting way that I don't think the American public even realizes that the connection is even
Yeah,
made.
that's a good distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good reason versus a good war, because you can have as many good reasons as you want.
All sorts of
but
good reasons.
You're not going to have a good war. That's the claim. The war itself is a pretty damn thing. And then, of course, there's the question. This is actually, you're talking about one writer. I'm reminded of Hannah Arendt, who in Hannah Arendt, pardon me, one of her essays. She talks about violence and how violence as a sort of justification is something that you try to justify.
Right.
What are the limitations of trying to justify violence? And a simple schema that she comes up with, a simple sort of model is, the more complex the lever is. Say violence is, I'm trying to stop this person from killing me or from killing my wife or from
Very
killing my
straightforward.
child or my friend or whatever.
Straightforwardly moral. And
It
not
is
trying to do
right
it. Yeah.
there. You know what you're doing. You know who you're stopping.
This
You
is
know
very
what the
clear.
consequence is.
Right.
You know what you're trying to achieve. You know what the threat is. All this stuff. All of it is as clear as daylight or as blood under the brightest of lights. It's extremely clear to see what's going on exactly. If you try to use it to start justifying things that are a decade away or unclearly defined, it really quickly loses its currency, as it should. Because wait, what are you fighting for? Who are you actually fighting on behalf of? Who specifically are you fighting against? This is the problem with a war on terror, of course. So many of the wars that we've picked up, this is maybe a fundamental problem with war itself. War is a rallying. In fact, it is the chief rallying cry. That is one of the big historical arguments in favor of wars. It brings nations together. It brings people together.
The beating heart of a nation.
Yeah, whether you're a tribe or whether you're the whole world fighting against aliens or cancer or whatever. It brings people together. But the problem is, in order to rally more successfully, you need to create a constant enemy, something that you can fight forever. Otherwise, the war ends and people start bickering against. You need something functionally that doesn't exist. You need an abstraction to fight against. You need something that is the exact opposite of what Hannah Arendt says you should use violence for, in other words. So it's this internal contradiction. We're driven, and this is my point. I'm not making this wasn't Hannah's point. We're driven to war over things that we should not ever be warring over, like abstractions, like, for instance, terror. Now, killing Osama bin Laden, killing specific threats,
that makes more sense.
Is both more sensible and less useful from the perspective of somebody who's trying to steer a nation.
Yeah, I feel you. War typically bad. Violence is, whether it's good, bad, or somewhat besides the point. It's just the backstop. It's the thing that asserts will versus somebody else's will in a situation, whether it's war, whether it's two people, fighting over, I don't know, tic-tac. It's just kind of is what it is. Her point about violence is a good point, and it makes all the sense in the world. And it does get sketchier when you're trying to make a decision and your goals and objectives are not entirely clear in it. I want to do something, yes. How do I do it within the context? I'm not clear on how to do that. And you're trying to make choices to get you to a specific goal, even though you're not entirely clear on what the goal is. You just know you're trying to get into the direction. That's life, right? That's just kind of the way life is. When these guys are in these military capacities, I don't know if they are looking downstream at each and every application of what a decision is going to make. I think it's typically find a threat and create it and assert it. And you find another one and do that too. And then you find another one and do that. And it was like, yeah, man, but that seems so petty. Doesn't matter. Is it a threat? Yes. Is it an annoyance? Yes. Then that's what you're going to do. So you're going to say China's committing genocide. You're going to say that guy says chemical weapons. You're going to say that the guy beats his wife. You're going to say that the guy didn't finish school and he's illegitimate and he's whatever. You're going to say that the guy, Vladimir Putin, picked Trump up on his shoulders and ran him across the finish. You're going to say all that stuff. Even though it seems petty, even though it seems like, God, man, that doesn't seem beneficial to the whole world. It's not about the whole world. It's about you and your specific interests. None of that stuff matters. None of that stuff real. None of that stuff has absolute value. It's about individual intention, individual want. And the catch is, in war, it's very specific in what the person wants to accomplish. The catch is, a lot of times these things aren't straight wars. Oftentimes they're not. Oftentimes it's, you have an opposition, and you need to find some way to weaken your opposition to the point where you can finally kill and finish your opposition.
Yeah, our sanctions war, our sanctions an act of war, are they on the level of
That's
a
my
war?
point.
If they're on the level of a war crime, but you haven't actually declared war, what is the purpose of a sanction? Is it to, it might be in an abstract sense, to grind your foe into submission or something like that. But it's not through, okay, I killed this body with this cannon or this drone, It's, their nation has suffered the deleterious consequences of me withholding whatever economic support I might have provided or buying products from them I might have provided, et cetera. You get how
but
sanctions
that's the point.
work.
I mean,
that's exactly what the point is.
Specifically the literal point. It's like we need to injure
And yet
harm until we get to the point where we can win.
We're comfortable doing it though because it's a couple of notches away. It's a
Below
couple
war.
of
Exactly.
a couple of notches away from violence.
Yes.
It's a couple of moves away. It's a couple of sort of levels of abstraction away from violence. In the same way that a person sitting at a drone, fly in the proverbial sense, sitting at a computer, flying a drone, killing somebody, they're just detached enough from that experience to not suffer immediately post-traumatic stress disorder and all of the other,
and keep in mind, that's
sort
what
of
power on some
moral
level
nausea
wants. The abstraction of it is the thing that makes it that much more effective.
Yes.
Like if the guy, my wife gets very angry at the swan that killed the ducklet to eat it. My wife has no issue sitting there eating a hamburger.
Oh, I saw it brutal. I was watching.
Yeah.
This nature is cruel,
Nature
man.
can be cruel.
It was just
But the
sitting
catch
in an
is,
alleyway and a
that
crow.
swan, if that swan had $1 to pay to get a chicken sandwich, my wife would have no issue with it at all.
Yes, and,
it's that. It's the abstraction of it. If you can get a person and say, all right, we're going to build a program that is going to fly and kill.
But we do.
And but that's the point.
But
who's responsible
but
for
is
that
it more
debt?
humane? Is our sanctions in the same way that we have you have the different ways of doing it, but you can have a little air gun that just, I don't want to get too gory, but that just kills the cattle.
Yeah.
That kills the chicken, that does the work of killing the thing. It experiences no pain. It lives its life on this quote unquote farm inside of whatever building with access to sunlight. I'm a little bit cynical, a little bit, bitter about this stuff. Anyway, even though I eat meat, they do this to animals. That's more humane, isn't it? Are sanctions more humane because they remove the explicit violence?
No,
because there's something
it depends.
suffocating.
It's sanitized violence.
Exactly, and there's
Is the
something
catch.
suffocating about sanitized violence. There's something horribly dishonest, despicable, and it's like this weird, deep dislodging of, okay, that does not feel right.
Because it doesn't supposed to be sanitized, if that makes sense.
Violence is not supposed to be sanitized.
It's like
exactly.
what the Star Trek episode where these guys will do war simulations. And then depending on simulation, the people would just go and kill themselves based on how the simulation ended. That way they could protect infrastructure, protect the society and everything else.
They take it
And it's
seriously.
like, that's not what this is supposed to be like. You guys missed the point. It's supposed to hurt. That's why, it hurts so you don't do it.
Yeah.
And you guys are missing the point. And that's supposed to be sanitized.
Those are real repercussions, and there's something to respect about that. I don't know, that level of commitment. I know that wasn't the point.
We
you were
want to
making,
keep killing each other, but we need to find a better way to do this. I love that. It's like take the stop killing each other is not on the table.
Yeah. Well, and I guess part of what's worrying about the whole sanitized violence is that it feels, I've used the term, and I think we've talked about this before, the idea of like potential energy. There are different types of energy, literally in a physics sense. There's kinetic energy, different types of movement. There's also potential energy, where it's sort of
coiled up,
possible forces that can be brought into effect very quickly. So, for instance, chemical bonds, the way that molecules are stitched together, there's certain things that you could introduce to that bond that would cause them to very rapidly explode, for instance, where you accelerate this thing. That's a potential energy that's stored in those cells. Sanitized violence, nuclear weapons, the fact that, at least to our knowledge, we haven't thrown these things at each other in the thousands, that's a kind of sanitized lack of violence. That what that breeds over time is peril, always an inch away, always the most severe form of peril that you can be. It's this weird, I don't know, again, we tried to hide from ourselves, for better and for worse, the violence that we could commit on a moment's notice. And I'm worried that at the end of the day, what we're preparing for ourselves is just the most horrible kind of violence. Where like World War II and World War I were major surprises because you had these massive technological advancements. You'd never seen wars like that on the world stage before.
Yeah.
Worried that we're preparing ourselves, of course, for something even more, all in our attempts to put violence just that much further outside the periphery, just that much more beyond the pale,
Well, and also use the threat of that to get your ends.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole brinksmanship thing. It's like this threat of violence is there. It's ever present. It's always there. It's dramatic in what could take place. And each side basically uses that to lean. Like, you don't want me to punch you in the face. You don't want me to punch you in the face. And it's like this nonsense constantly, where bringing down hysteria just doesn't seem to be on the table. It's nobody likes the war. Everybody thinks wars are horrible. You don't want a war, so you better give me what I want. Well, what do you mean? Give you what you want. I mean, if you don't want a war, you better leave me alone. And you get to this kind of weird buildup constantly. That guy's an enemy, and we have to continue and keep parity with that person. And that person is going to build their armaments, so we got to build more armaments. It's when it finally uncoils. That's your point.
Yeah.
It's dramatic and it's problematic, as opposed to dealing with the issues that are associated with your world and your society in order to kind of bring that stuff down.
And there is a timeline in which like China invaded the United States after the George Floyd killing, because look at the horror of our police. You see what I'm saying?
Right,
There's a timeline in which the tables are completely reversed, and I guess I would blame them in the same way that I would hope I'm currently blaming the U.S. for all of its screwed up activities overseas. But, I think we agree on this. The point is the incentives are there. What's weird, we got to close this out. What's weird to me is that sometimes people actually resist those incentives. They do the right things. They change things around.
Right. Yeah. Inflection points.
It's like they're weird miracles. And I'll use the word miracle not in although it's obviously religious connotations, but it's just unexpected stuff that happens,
I don't think it's
for
a
the
miracle
better.
at all. I think people get sick of living in certain situations. I think you're steeped in a situation for a long time. I think you have this blinder in regards to figuring out how to get out of it. You just kind of, all right, this is life.
Yeah.
I deal with life the way it is. This notion of outcomes and other ideas don't factor in because you've so grounded into that particular reality. And every so often, there are times where you hit your head. There are moments of clarity. And there's I'm sick of this.
There is. Yeah, no, I hear you. But in the same way that the revolution will not be televised, I feel like the revolution will also not be predicted or prognosticated or hypothesized or something like that. Hindsight is 2020. The exact nature of how deep changes happen, you can see that something's going to come, but who knows what actually is coming? You can just feel it or hear it. And I don't even know how far away it is at this point, but there's a feeling that something is.
There's a feel there.
Changing.
I think that's why Saki, and maybe that's why Saki, when he asked her that question, she kind of was like, well, I mean, we just got to remember how things used to be in politics and so forth, because there's this feel of something is different. And I think they seem to be responding to it, or at the very least rhetorically, while not necessarily doing anything real. I think they don't want to give up their gains. I think it's that. I think we have been able to run the roost for so long, and that the public is now freaking out. And even if the public is not entirely aware of why the public is freaking out, the public is still freaking out. It doesn't matter if the public knows why the public is behaving the way the public is behaving. And you get this kind of strife, this kind of conflict, and you have people who are sitting above it all who are like, all right, we got to do something to manage this. How do we manage this? And it's that. It's managing in a sense of not deep systemic change. We don't want to give up our stuff. Nothing is going to fundamentally change. We just need to manage how the public is dealing with us as we move forward. I do think there's a certain level of gamesmanship to it. If you are Obama and you're thinking to yourself, all right, I'm a master of the universe, and I make these political choices, I touch one thing in this country, I move this thing in the next, I put money into this group that's undermining this country, and I'm basically playing global whatever, stratagem. And there are things that blow back where you get it wrong because you're a person and you're not great at doing that stuff. And so, you find, you put a Stuxnet virus in Iran and you find that thing gets out on the web and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't anticipate that. Or you have, you pay the Mujahideen. I'm sorry, you work with the group that's to undermine Afghanistan, the Soviets in Afghanistan, and that group becomes the Mujahideen. You know what I mean? Like that, those things are consequences that are so far downstream from this master of the universe stuff. We get it wrong. And so we get a world that's chaotic on some level, where you have people who are trying to manage it on some level within a sphere to which they try to manage it, especially in the political space, but their ability to do it is limited. Their even motivation of doing it from a good place is not necessarily there. It's about self-interest. No, I think, look, I think there's a spiritual component to this, and it's not woo-woo in a sense. Maybe it's empathy. Maybe it's our ability to get along with one another without trying to put a knife in the other person.
Well, it's the kind of relationships that people have with each other. I think is actually a part of it.
But I think it's deeper than just this, okay, let's just not kill each other, and that's okay.
Yeah, because there's something about resisting incentives. There's this philosopher, Ibn Khaldun, the 14th century Islamic philosopher, actually a bit of a heretic in his own way, but based in Baghdad, I believe, 14th century. Anyway, famous dude, arguably the first sociologist, big innovator in economics, had this theory called, in this book, the Muqaddimah, basically this theory of civilization and society. Yeah. And you probably have seen memes or you've heard of the idea, like the strong make good times, or strong, I'll use the gender version. Strong men create good times create weak men create bad times create strong men. That's a very, very simple cycle, for civilization. And that specifically has become a bit of a meme among certain circles, particularly on the right. One of the other components of the philosophy, his idea, what creates this sort of civilizational churn or this cycle, he used this term asabiya, which is basically the level of social solidarity any group of elites has. You have these hordes, effectively, who are very well integrated on the outside of this old and sort of stagnant society. They come in, they take over, they dominate, and gradually the social bond that previously held them together weakens and weakens and weakens. I think there's an element of truth to that.
Yes.
And I think that you're talking about spirituality, the kind of elites that you have, the kind of people who are in charge, if they're running a bureaucracy, they're going to be different from being ragtag revolutionaries.
Yes.
Or
Their perspective is everything is different.
And there's a lot to criticize about the Russian Revolution and its consequences.
Yeah.
But arguably, the people who did that kind of thing successfully were ragtag revolutionaries in the way they came out of an intellectual core, but they were outsiders. They had a very clear idea what they were doing, and they were certainly not bureaucratically minded. You know what I mean? And we're living, the whole U.S. government, all the federal employees, it is a massive, bloated bureaucracy without the kind of social solidarity, without the kind of integrated leadership that you'd need. Instead, you just have starched shirts and ties. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As signs of social status and belonging, and people, shaking their heads and nodding their hands. We lack that. And so on a deep spiritual level, I don't feel like there is a connection. I feel like people are put in this machine to do a certain job, and the machine is just running wild, doing what it wants to do.
There's no vision associated with it. Don't get me wrong. That machine could be, again, phenomenal. Like it's a machine. It's like any other machine that you use it for a particular task or for a particular job. In this case, that machine, that job is society.
Yeah.
You need to create a society that people can grow and thrive, etc. Or you create a society for whatever reason the society needs to be created. I mean, the society chooses on some level. It's a creation of itself in an odd way. But that it can be good or it can be bad. You could meaning you could have a society that's efficient at creating human beings, and from the standpoint of health, happiness, education, etc., etc. Or you can have one that does what it does. This one. One has vision, the other one doesn't. It lingers and meanders as if the machine itself is enough of it to give it direction. And it's not. The machine is like, it's like, all right, we just took our hand off the wheel of the car. Great. Is that car going to do fantastic things? No, that car is going to go all over the place. And that's kind of where we are. I mean, even with the NASA stuff, and the NASA stuff is minor, by the way. But when these guys are like, we're going to the moon, and we're going to beat the Ruskies in space, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
When they're making that statement, you have people who are organized in their headspace of space, progress, science, development, etc. We're going to be this, we're going to be that. And whatever you want to think of that generation and the fact that Kennedy making that speech was a Cold War speech, you still organize people around this higher vision of humanity. That's a phenomenal thing. We lack that. I don't think we have that. I think people think that just the pursuit of cash in and of itself is enough. The pursuit of power in and of itself is enough. You don't necessarily need a hand on the wheel in regards to the direction.
It's true.
And how people are is just how people are.
We set up an the weird thing about the modern ideology, whatever, is that in some ways it is the anti-ideology. It doesn't require there to be people even. It requires that there be mechanical forces, economic forces, and that people be rational agents effectively, more or less, who are all interacting and competing and collaborating with each other in the system.
Yeah.
And that, the whole Adam Smith thing, and arguably both communism and fascism and modern ideas of democracy, all of these things are all stemming from the same sort of pool of thoughts that created modern capitalism, yes, and modern socialism. The idea that you can have a personless system where you don't need a person with individual character, where you don't need specific leaders, but the system has its own forces, its own counterbalances and system of weights and levers, et cetera, that sort of makes things happen. Every modern society, as far as I can tell, is sort of built into that. But what that doesn't take into account, it could be seen as spiritual. It could also just be seen as psychological, that there be good people in those places to resist the systems of incentives, to resist everything that's making them want to do it for self-serving reasons. I don't think we have any kind of real art. How do you teach virtue?
Yeah.
We have lost then there probably is an art and a science to teaching virtue. We don't know how to do that. And I feel like me even using the word, people are going to think I'm serious because, but there are incentives. What keeps a person virtuous when there are incentives?
Yeah.
Maybe in some societies historically, it's weird that I even have to ask the question. Yes, there have been virtuous people. Not every elite has been virtuous, and not. It's that there's no. I'm not trying to make any more sweeping a claim than that there have been ethical people, and we need them.
We do need ethical people. I would prefer a system, however, keep those people in check. Because otherwise, I don't have this belief in people like that.
No.
I mean, I think people are basically driven by their incentives. My producer was like, "That's really cynical." Like we were having a conversation. I was like, "That's really cynical," but I think it's true. I do think the environment. Look, I think there is an ideological virtuous bent just in regards to society and in general. Let's say just this kind of general idea that goes on. That runs up heavy against you need to eat, You need to sleep. You need to compete with this person or in this group or that group in order to get this done or that done. And there are shortcuts in order to get the things done. You're stuck in that. And so it's like your ideological basis is the thing that pushes back against all of the incentives that says, just cut corners to get this thing accomplished. Yeah, I think we lose it on some level. There's this weird discontinuity that seems to be associated with the way we go about it. Marianne Williamson, she got joked a lot, but as you thought about what she was saying, though, she's putting it in this kind of woo-woo way, but I don't think it needs to be woo-woo. I think it's this notion of continuity or collective interests or something. I mean, you have 320 million people who exist all across the United States, going all the way from California to all the way to, let's say, like New York. And on some level, those people need to organize and be under some kind of banner. How does that work? Well, you invoke, God, or you invoke government, or you invoke something else that these people can be under, and they can call themselves Americans, and they can, not hate each other and kill each other. But if it's just passive tolerance, is passive tolerance enough? And maybe what we're running up against is, no, it's not. Maybe there does need to be some kind of organizing.
Yeah, but what's the rallying cry?
I have no idea.
Because
and that's the rub.
Yeah.
That's the rub. That's kind of my point with space stuff. Like, if you are going out and you are given a vision, you give your country, your world something that says, yes, we agree with that.
No,
he's steering the ship. He's steering the car.
The most effective way to rally around is to rally against, and that's the rub that you always meet. And if you want space to be a peaceful final frontier, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
Because, what are we rallying around? Exploration? That doesn't compete with a threat, the perception of a threat. And I wish that it did. There's a conversation to be had about the age of Aquarius and how we need a generational shift from thinking in love-based ways, from thinking in fear-based ways to love-based ways. And I'm down for that conversation if I have a feeling that you're going to make some sense and that I know why you're making that claim. I'm not saying you're saying any of this stuff, but I've heard people make these claims. It's not magic, man. You know what I mean? You know exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. At the end of the day, a lot of the time we agree when it comes to incentives and this stuff. These are forces. These distort. And what you need, I guess, is somebody to make wise choices instead. We need to close this show out. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, a slightly different version of the show today. A bit more philosophical, a bit less calls. Hey, though. We'll be back tomorrow morning, folks, signing off Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you again at 7 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. Have a great day, folks.